So, uh, yeah. What were you guys trying to discuss before? I don't know.
I think we were going to broach the topic of parental interactions and the transitioning of children and how much they get to decide that. I guess
Right.
somebody else wants to summarize that. So, like, basically, is if the child, whether they're trans or not, like how much say a parent gets to have in that, basically.
Sorry. No.
So,
Sorry. Say it again. I'm sorry.
so if a child, like, basically, is if a parent gets to decide if a child transitions or not, basically.
Okay. Hmm. All right. Um. Do we have any? Sport guy. Thank you for the 500 bits. Really appreciate that. Thank you for being so kind. Oh, a new bit badge. Great. Yeah. Yeah. Um. Oh, maybe. Or should I come up? Are you asking me to come up with a new bit badge? I don't know. I should probably think of something. Um. But do we have any? Oh, yeah. That's right. You said you're like gender queer, or what would you describe
Me,
yourself? Yeah. Wording.
uh, I I previously identified as non-binary, but like, talking to my friends, I basically say I don't care. My gender does not have a applicable point to my life, so it does not matter to me. So I'm
Okay.
just a person.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
So
how I stand right now. It may be open to change in the future, but that's how I stand right now.
yeah. Yeah. Um. I just wondering if we could have someone who is transitioning.
Malcolm, I think, is trans. He said he's trans.
Who is
He's
Malcolm?
in the robot waiting room.
Okay. My mods need to check them out before they can come in. But yeah. Um. So hopefully that. So do you guys come up with any conclusions or?
We had just started the topic before you hopped in, so we're not really at that point yet. But if we want to start the conversation on it, we can go from there.
Hmm.
So,
Uh,
like,
we might
somebody
have.
want to state a position at all?
Yeah, you want to state a position.
I'm generally of the mindset that a parent does not have any meaningful way to determine if a child transitions or not. That is entirely up to the decision, and we need to facilitate that through the institutions to ensure that they have the informed and autonomous choice whether to transition or not.
Okay.
And
So
parents should facilitate whatever decision they make, but should not force them to.
okay. Does anyone disagree with that?
Not
Well,
really.
well, I would like to ask, where does you say the parent can't force it? So would would a parent be okay or in their rights as a parent if their child was born a male, but
Okay.
from the beginning of the child's birth, they treated that child as a female or as a woman or as a girl? So
Well,
would that be them forcing a transition if they raised them that way because they wanted a girl child instead of a boy?
yeah, I mean that itself is inherently like forcing a child to exhibit like characteristics, like express a gender of female or woman in that instance, but like a man, like if they're like born with male characteristics. The issue also is like um, I am of the mind that we really shouldn't be forcing people to identify a person's gender from birth. That should be up to the person to decide. Because basically, if a child is born and gender should not have a like a place in their development, they should be able to develop independent of gender. And if they want to choose and partake in different gender roles, they should be able to have that decision when they want to, and they shouldn't be forced to partake in any gender roles.
But then you run into the same problem. If you say they shouldn't do that, then they should raise them as a boy
No, they
because
shouldn't raise them as anything. They just raise them as a child. Just like, hello, you are a child. Here's your clothes. You can, and then from there you can distinguish like what type of clothes they like wearing, what feels good on them, and then from there you can buy clothes that they fit. And if they change their feelings over time, you're like, okay, here's new types of clothes. You want to wear these clothes? And wear those types of clothes. Like it basically, you shouldn't force them to uh, perform a gender role in any way until they want to.
but then I mean I would argue that 90% of parents do that. They
Yep.
they force
Yeah, it's a
child
bad
by
thing.
force. So you like so you want to reform like the entire way that parents parent their children, like the entire
Yeah.
society.
Yeah,
Is that
because gender.
is that inherently wrong to like change how people like raise their children?
Yeah, because that's why I mean that's what you're saying. You're saying that I can't choose to have my child transition, but now you're also saying I can't even choose to treat my child as quote unquote the gender that they were, or the gender that relates to the sex that they were born as. So what can I do?
So the issue here is you're conflating sex and gender. You can't meaningfully conflate those two because they really are existing different spheres.
No, I'm not complaining. What I'm saying is the man gender, we associate that with the male sex. So what you're saying is I can't raise my male child as a boy or a girl. I just have to raise them as a person.
Yeah, regardless of their sexual characteristics, you raise them as a child first, and then from there, once they have like developed enough, they can make the decision of which gender they would choose to perform.
That's
They're
I mean,
really
it seems very in to achieve the act of freedom. That seems very restrictive, and
yeah.
How is it restrictive?
telling me I can't choose how to raise my child, what value system of my child, what I mean, it
So,
seems.
let me ask you some hypotheticals of different kinds.
Wait. If we're going to work within the framework of our current system, right? You raise the child with the gender they've been assigned at birth, and then when if the child has indicated that they want to transition, then you should respect the child's decision. We have like some research into like gender cognition of children that seems to state that children, transgender youth from the ages of 5 through 12 can identify with a gender, and it actually correlates to something, their actual gender cognition. So it seems like if a child asks you to that they want to be a gender other than the one that they were assigned at birth, then you should just do that. And that's the current system. Now we can continue this discussion on to where the system should go from there. But in the current system, that's probably how you should do it. You should be open enough as a parent to if your child asks you that they want to identify as the gender that they weren't assigned, then you should just listen to the child.
Can I ask some questions? I'm curious.
But before you do, it seems like the other person was, according to their story, is not currently banned on Twitch. So just so you know, that other person apparently is not currently banned on Twitch. So I think we're good. I don't know, but yeah.
Suddenly, Prime gets banned forever.
Yeah, right. It's really dumb. Okay, so yeah, just putting that out there for the record is that this person claims that they are currently unbanned from Twitch. So we'll just leave it out there. Okay, so you were going to say something. What would you like me to call you?
Just call me Justice.
Justice. Okay, I'll call you Justice.
Sure.
All right, go ahead.
So I have some questions. What are we talking about when we are saying transitioning? Are we talking about medications? Are we talking about like, is it surgery? What
Well,
actually?
there's a broad
what
types of different.
partakes?
There's a different types of transition that occur. So there's social transition, there's hormonal transition, and there's like sexual reassignment surgery. So basically, is like for like a child, like if they're like early child before they even like begin to experience like hormonal changes from there, you would normally allow them to engage in social transition, like change of pronouns, change of clothes, change of like physical appearance, how they present themselves, and then from there, once they're starting to go into puberty, you can use different hormonal treatments. So, like for example, if a child is like born in a male body and they begin to like develop increased signs of testosterone, then you can you could say like, hey, you are beginning to show this. Does it feel good? Okay for you? Then like, okay, no, it doesn't feel good. Then you're like, okay, here's some hormone blockers for a time, and then from there you can decide like if a child is expressing it at an early age, then you could pretty much understand like they're wanting to have estrogen as it is now. So basically is once they reach the levels of like beginning to show puberty, then you can like show the opposite like hormone. So like born in a male body, but you give them estrogen. Born in a female body, you give them like testosterone.
Yeah, you give
And
them a bunch of spirulactone if they're
Yeah, and then from
Um,
there, once they've like grown up, you can basically have them decide if they want to engage in like sexual reassignment surgery. Like some people engage in bottom dysphoria. It's just like I'm not fully sure of the full extent that sexual reassignment surgery has been developed. So I would have to do like personal research on that itself. But generally, I would agree that sexual reassignment surgery is like a little later in life comparatively as opposed to like hormone treatments.
So the topic is if I were a parent, can I change my child's gender?
Well, you
Like
can't.
force them to transition? Is that what we're saying? If they without like their consent. Is that what we're saying?
Well, I
Well,
think the question. Sorry, you
well,
go.
the question was if your child wanted to transition, do you have the parental authority to say no?
I think depending on the situation, yeah, because
Mhm.
you're the adult in that situation. There's going to be a lot of things that the child's not going to want to
Okay,
do
so
that you're
So
just
wait,
going
if
to
I
have
have a
to
question.
stop
I-
them on.
If we can demonstrably prove that like every child would like knows this decision, like knows 100% that what their gender is, do you still think that that would still go through? Like, you still think that you're the parent, you have control over the situation, so you can make decisions that are better for your child, even if if you 100% can know that your child wants to express their gender in a different way?
I don't know. How old are they?
it
Why does
doesn't
that
matter
matter?
how old they
Wait,
are.
wait, wait.
Well, it should matter.
In this hypothetical, I'm giving you, so like the hypothetical, the child 100% knows that they want to transition and that this is the right choice. As a parent, do you have the right to intervene here? Just because you're the parent and you're
I
older?
think yes, but should you?
Why?
Like, is it
Why?
morally? Are we talking from a moral ground or are we talking from a legal ground?
Not,
What?
so
Okay,
morally,
okay.
why? Sure, let's talk about morals. So like, why morally do you have the right to like tell your child
I
I'm the
don't think
adult here?
morally you do.
Okay, so legally you think that's our current state, which is fine because laws don't always emulate what we believe morally, right? So why do you think there's a legal case for this?
I mean,
Like, why
guess
should the laws be the way that they are?
why should they be the way they are?
Well, I mean, while
Um,
he thinks, I mean, if you
Yeah.
want to answer now, I
sure.
can while you think about it. I
Yeah.
think that we have a clear legal standard to go by, and we say that kids are not able to fully know the consequences of their actions. That's why
Okay.
we don't let kids drive. That's why we don't let
Sure.
kids vote or drink
Wait.
alcohol.
There's
So,
an
Sure.
issue.
but what I'm saying, so if they don't have the cognitive ability to fully, understand the weight of those actions, then why should they be allowed to, make a change that has a lifetime effect?
Okay, well, we have a system in place that basically allows children to learn of like gender transition and the issues that can come with gender dysphoria, and then they can make an informed choice. Like we have the
Well,
institutions in
that
place.
doesn't solve the problem that he's bringing up because
Yeah, but
he's
but
saying
what I
he's saying that a child cannot have an informed decision because the child doesn't have doesn't understand the concept of long-term effects.
I would disagree with
I
that
mean,
because
that's not.
Okay,
I mean,
do you think a child should say, "No, I don't want to get this surgery. That's going to save my life
I'm not
because
saying
surgeries are
surgery. Like
scary"? No,
I
no,
went
I'm
down
just
like
saying.
the entire process. Like I told you like the different processes of the transition itself, and
I'm
then I
not
said
saying. I'm saying there's things that you have to do as a parent that the child's not going to want to do, and
like what?
that's why the law has to be the way it is, where
But you
you
realize
have
that
to have
children
control.
are having gender dysphoria, and because they're not allowed to transition, they're fucking killing themselves.
What age?
Like and like significantly like teenagers, like early teens, mid teens, late teens, adults.
I think at
like,
I think if they're teenagers, they probably know better. I that's why I was asking before what age, and you said what does that, or somebody said what does that matter? And I think age does matter because you have more of an idea of who you are as a person. When I was 6 years old, I used to dress up in my sister's clothing. Now maybe then they would have thought, oh, he wants to be a girl or something. I dressed up in my sister's clothing because I only had sisters, and that's what was around.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
but the
and
issue is
that's
you're
fine because you're like you're not, but you didn't express the want to change genders, right? Like just
I don't
because you're
know.
wearing,
I,
we
I
should
was like
well,
5 or
the
6 at the time. I
okay,
couldn't tell you.
yeah,
I mean, I used to say I like wearing
but saying
I
I like
used
wearing
to,
dresses and saying I want to be a
yeah.
girl is a completely different thing, right? So
But
somebody in
if you're
chat
5
asked,
or
has
6,
there been
I
any?
don't know if you know very well what
It
you
seems
want in
like
life.
from the research we do that kids do. I could even post some.
Yeah, I don't really know a ton about this topic, which is why I was asking the questions I asked.
yeah,
Well,
because what
real
happens
quick,
is
in the hypothetical, Sam also asked you to imagine if children like fully understood their gender and they knew like the gender that they wanted to be when they were a kid. So a lot of these like well, they're too young things wouldn't apply to his hypothetical because he specifically said that
That's also true.
we're at least presupposing that they understand how gender works. So
Well, because
the issue comes is like significantly like children are understanding their gender expectations put on them even from an early age, and they're performing those behaviors, and then from there they're
So
being
this is a
forced
study
into
on
those
gender.
roles.
I just posted a study about gender cognition in youth from the ages of 5 to 12.
Where'd you post it?
I posted in Twitch chat if anybody wants to read it, and then
Yeah.
okay, I'll
Yeah,
post it in VC chat as well.
Yeah, the problem when engaging with that hypothetical, then you can extend that to anything and say that if you teach children, about drinking alcohol at 13, to teach them the risk and the benefits, then they should be able to make the choice on their own whether they want to
Okay,
drink
but
or not.
the issue here is we have scientific studies that demonstrate the impacts of allowing for gender transition as opposed to alcohol. Like we can show like scientifically that alcohol consumption in a childhood like negatively affects the development of a child as opposed to like gender transition is a positive development.
Pause for a second. Pause for a second. And we'll get back to. Don't forget your point. Hey, you. You're back.
Yes.
We need to get this out there for the record. What exactly happened to you?
Okay, that's what I was trying to say. It's kind of a funny story. I used to stream Minecraft when I was 14 years old. This guy named Avalanche TV, he came into my stream and he raided me with about 100 people. And all the people said, twerk on camera or we're going to report you. And they reported me en masse because I was young. It kind of freaked me out. I was like 14 years old. That's kind of weird. So I declined. They false reported me. I was banned by Twitch. And then subsequently, I kept reaching out. It took a couple months to finally get somebody, but they reversed the ban and then my channel was reinstated and I've had it ever since. So it was a completely false ban. Thought it was a funny story. That's kind of why I brought it up. I didn't even think about that. So sorry about that. But yeah, that's the full story.
Okay, all right. We see on your channel that you have videos with your face on it currently. If you could say your channel once again for Twitch in case they happen to be watching this later on, which channel are you referring to?
Yes, Smokin' Sessions Productions. That's twitch.tv/Smokin' Sessions Productions.
That was the channel that you were using when you were a kid?
Well, the channel name was Crazy Rocky at the time. However, I changed the channel name. The channel is the exact same channel. All the same followers. Videos from years ago are still on there from, you know what I mean? So same channel, different name.
Gotcha. All right. So staying here for the record, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Back to you, Strawberry.
I know you said remember what I was going to say, but
what was the last thing you said, Wordy, or is it Sam? I forget what it was.
I said the last thing. I was saying like we have like brain has to work here, but basically we show that there's a difference between alcohol consumption and gender transition. Alcohol consumption negatively has an impact on the development of the child, while gender transition has a positive impact on the child who chooses to transition generally. Like there's statistical outliers going to be where a child wants to detransition after like they've engaged with that, but we've like statistically shown that broad majority of people who like have gender dysphoria or perceived gender dysphoria want to transition. Once they transition, they don't kill themselves as much.
I think there's also an interesting difference between alcohol and transitioning. I mean, if there's obviously a lot of differences, but the window for like things like puberty blockers, like there's a specific window. There is no real window for kids wanting to drink. Like a kid not drinking isn't missing anything, waiting until they're, I don't know, 16, 18, 21, which is the current legal age. But a kid who
it's not the
wants
drinking.
to,
It's just the aspect of letting a child make decisions that at this time right now we say you can't make this decision until you're 18. But it's not. It doesn't have to be drinking. It's just saying what you're saying is that if we educate children enough that even at the age of 6 or 7, they can make these decisions that we would normally say only an adult can make, because it takes a certain amount of cognitive ability to understand the full gravity and the extent that that change is going to have on that decision is going to have on the rest of your life. And I don't think any amount of education can tell me that a 6 or 7-year-old at that age knows that, hey, if I start taking hormone blockers, or if
well, 6 to 7-year-olds aren't going to be taking hormones in the
Yeah,
first
you
place.
don't.
They're going to
One,
be, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you
You
don't
go, Dr.
take
K, you
fucking
take it.
hormone. Yeah, you
And
don't
also-
fucking take hormone blockers at fucking 7. What are you fucking talking about?
Well, and also this is an intrinsic thing as well that a lot of people, when you're transgender, it's kind of like being gay. There's a lot of people that claim, oh, I knew from a young age, and my parents knew from a young age. Generally speaking, I'm sure, of course, there can be environmental factors that affect these things, but generally speaking, a lot of times this is intrinsic. And so to think that from a younger age, a child might show signs of, maybe not identifying with their gender, and all that seems pretty realistic. And on top of that, most of these decisions are still mediated through the parents. I mean, generally speaking, the parents do have to sign off on these things, just like if you allow a kid to go see a rated R movie, you know what I mean? It is mediated through the parents.
Yeah, and like it's mediated not just through the parents, it's also mediated through the doctors, right? And really what's going on here, right, is essentially the only situation where this legislation is relevant is a situation where the patient in question says I consent, the doctor says I consent, and the parent says I consent, and the state of Arkansas is like, but what about my feelings on the matter? Have you considered my feelings, right? It's really just a way of being punitive, right?
I hate this so
Like,
much.
Well,
I live here.
I mean, the
Awful.
question posed, I know y'all just came in. The question was, if the kid consented and the doctor consented and the parent didn't consent? That's the situation.
I don't think that the parent should have the ability here. I think it should be between the child and the doctor, as it seems like the research states that the child has the ability to recognize gender cognition at an early enough age, like around 5 to 12, about the time when we should probably start considering puberty blockers between the ages of 5 and 12, to when that they can have that conversation with their doctor and figure out what the correct treatment is for that child.
And if the child doesn't understand it, the doctor sure as hell will. So
yeah.
And that, even that aside, like puberty blockers, right, like aren't irreversible, right? When you start taking HRT, when you start taking testosterone, that is things that is for the most part irreversible. Puberty blockers simply delay the puberty. Like that's pretty reversible. It's not like they're getting, permanent shit done. Like,
well, I mean, I can post research, but from what I remember reading, is that it's not reversible because your body during that age is when the puberty is supposed to happen. So if you miss that window, then
yeah, you'll develop differently, but it's not as though you won't develop or
Yeah,
you're
and
stuck
usually
as a
it's not
different
like
gender forever.
And usually it's not a significant timeline. Usually hormone blockers
You'll
delay it
mostly
to a
be like,
year.
well, that was a bad mistake. If you like started doing it and then realized no, you're the other way around. But like that basically almost never happens. The only time someone detransitions is usually due to social stigma. So like I'm not too concerned about like any of this. Like if the kid has the wherewithal to be 100% sure they want to go onto puberty blockers, right? Like a kid isn't even going to know about puberty blockers unless they've done like some level of like checking in on what they're about to do themselves, right? Like it's not something you just randomly fucking learn about from some dude in a back alleyway somewhere, right? Like this
Wait,
is
are you telling
something
me you don't
you
get it from
learn
the gender
about.
goblin?
Exactly. This is something you know about. You're gonna be usually making an informed decision. Like, don't worry about it. And like, fuck Arkansas. They are just trying to medicalize people's bodies away. The same thing they do with people who want abortions.
Hi, I live in Arkansas. I hate it here.
Yeah.
So just
Hey, you need if you need like a place, I got fucking
Nah,
a garage I can stow you in for a couple weeks.
I'm white enough. It'll be fine.
Hey.
All right, I mean,
do you have any other humans stowed in your garage? Like a
Vegan
single
Prime?
light
You got
source?
eagles stowed in your garage, right?
no, my garage is for carpentry and for storing a canoe.
And humans, apparently. No, you made it very clear.
Prime,
Storing
please
humans.
do not, please, even as a joke, do
Okay.
not say that. Thank
Okay,
you.
don't worry. I'm just messing around. But all right. So thank you. We have 2 new people who've joined in. And their names are Nuke Laney.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you. Thank you for joining. Thanks for stopping by. And do we have another person? You've got a interesting name.
It's Sergeant Peppers, but the original was taken, so the 9 is a G.
Okay. What do you want me to call you though?
Malcolm's fine.
Malcolm. Okay, Malcolm then. Malcolm. Thank you also for coming through. All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you guys, we were talking about the age where parents. I guess this is kind of came off our other topic we were doing in the closed panel. We're talking about whether at what point kids can decide to transition, right? Should be able to decide to transition, and this is related to that, and whether parents can have a say in that, can say like no or yay, right? Like or yay or nay, excuse me, about that. So, what do you all think?
I think that like the big problem is that a lot of people misunderstand the rigor that is required for minors to medically transition, especially in the United States. In the United Kingdom, it's a lot worse. So a lot of people are under the impression that, you know, like a 14-year-old kid goes to the doctor and is like, I want to be a boy. And the doctor's like, here's your prescription for testosterone. When in reality, like the rigor is pretty incredible. And it would require supportive parents in the first place. And we know that like LGBT rates of acceptance are like pretty low, especially in like the trans community. So it's pretty unrealistic that every kid that identifies as trans is like walking into the endocrinologist and getting their tits chopped off like day of. And I think that a lot of it is just like fear mongering. And I think that as long as, you know, they're of the age of consent for like medical shit. So like in Washington, at the age of 16, like kids can be in charge of their own medical care. If you're like 16 in Washington and you want to medically transition, your parents are like, no, you're going to hell. Like, fuck that. Like, if you have the autonomy to make medical decisions in other arenas of like your medical care, you should be allowed to access medical transition as well.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah. I think children should be able to freely express themselves, and I think a lot of the arguments I hear are people talking about medical transition of children, but I think in reality, most people on the left that I talk to and that I argue with would just want access to hormonal blockers, and that people should be able to express however they want. I think it's a lot of fear mongering, and this is the new like cultural war front for the right, and that's why we've seen all these bills go up in the same week all around the country. It's supposed to draw attention and make it the new thing that we're all shouting about.
Okay. Anyone else? We'll jump in on this. We don't have to stay on this topic if you don't want. But anyone else?
I mean, fuck Arkansas. Like, what else is there to say, frankly? And every other state that's trying to introduce some of that shit right now.
Well, yeah, Kentucky was one we were talking about specifically in terms of blockers. But Arkansas is with the sports thing where a person.
Well, there's also another bill that's being included too.
Okay, great.
What happens is,
yeah, Arkansas is just particularly belligerent, which is why they have my ire. But it's
fair enough.
There's plenty of hate to go around.
So there's another bill coming in that basically says doctors have the conscience to deny access to medical care for like LGBTQ people. So basically, there's the anti-trans bill, but then there's also another bill coming in where they can't, they don't have to treat children because they're LGBTQ because it's the religious exemption basically. So doctors don't have to do that, and it's a direct contradiction to the Hippocratic Oath. So they try to classify it under the conscience idea, where conscience is I don't have to treat LGBTQ people, and that's the problem there.
Wait, do you mean treat as because if a doctor doesn't want to be a specialist regarding transitioning, I can get that. But are you saying just general practitioner?
Yeah, just general.
Yeah.
Well, that's messed up.
I did an entire segment on it, and you can find it on my YouTube. So I went over it. So if you want to check that out.
I see.
And
All right,
it's
I got my golden shit list of states right now that are introducing trans exclusionary type esque bills, and the list is, and I'm not going to go through all of it, right, because it's a lot of them. But essentially, the Great Lakes state, North Dakota, Montana, Utah, basically the entire South except Louisiana. Good on you, Louisiana. And Texas is introducing those bills. New Jersey, huh? West Virginia, Rhode Island, and Maine. Maine's another weird one. I don't.
So,
All right.
but introducing a bill, it just means introducing a bill, right? Like, if you talk, because anyone can introduce a bill, right? So even in New Jersey, right, because a Republican could put the bill out and that would count. So
It means that it's moving through the state at some level right now.
is that what they
Like
said?
it's introduced and it's getting momentum essentially.
Are you?
What you mean? It's gone through committees?
Yeah, it's either going through committees. It's going like again. There are a
I mean-
lot of bills. There's a lot of different ways they're being introduced and at levels that they're at right now. These are just the list of states that have them in consideration at some level of governance.
Okay.
Do you think that a bill could be introduced to be voted on, to be turned down? Like, so let's say a Republican introduces this bill.
Well,
and
sure.
then the
Like in
Democrats in charge-
Arkansas, the governor could have shot it down after it got through both the House and the Senate.
I'm not talking about like actual. So I'm talking about like a ceremonial bill. So let's say in New Jersey, this bill goes to vote, and like a majority of and it's shat on in all parts of the government, and this could be kind of like a signal to say we're not doing this anymore. This is like a statement that this is the nail in the coffin for this. Do you think that would be an appropriate like way to use that bill in?
Sure, but no one's introducing the bill with that intention. They're introducing it to be transphobic.
Yes, I'm not saying the people who introduced the bill, but I'm saying that the rest of the governance could continue to let them, instead of like letting it just die.
Sure, that's what I hope they all do.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, like, yeah, that's what I hope they all do, but that's not what's going to happen.
You
in a
just
lot
don't
of
have
these
to
states.
call it up for vote in a committee, and it does the same thing.
Essay in chat is saying that the Jersey bill is democratically sponsored, which is yeah. Wow. Okay, if that's the case, holy
Well,
crap.
aren't they a trifecta?
What are the details of that bill?
I don't, no idea. Do you have the? Is that included in the list of details of the bill?
No, I just pulled up a master list.
Okay.
If you want, I have more on it. I can take the time to get more.
Thousands of bills get introduced every session.
Essay says in New Jersey, Assembly Bill 4593. Thank you, Essay, for this. The only one of the state bills sponsored by a Democrat takes on an entirely different subject than the other bills. The same bill has been introduced in the state Senate. Valerie Veneri Huddle's bill addresses strip searches of transgender inmates, while on the one hand allowing the inmate to express a gender preference for who conducts the strip search, the bill also would allow correctional officers to opt out of such searches if they have religious. I mean, what? Can you put the rest of that in there? Holy crap! Because if they're opting out, that's fine. Oh, maybe. Okay. So hold on. Let me see. Let me play this out. So if there's a trans woman, right? So from male to female, and they say, I want a female to search me, right? But if the officer has a religious exemption, right? It's like, oh, I have a religious thing, and God says I can't touch man.
It doesn't
at
make
that
any
point. Yeah, I
sense.
mean, at that point,
I
don't you
wouldn't
think?
want them touching trans children in the first place.
I mean,
this is inmates.
Yeah, inmates. Yeah. But like, I mean,
I
from
don't
your
see in the
perspective,
Bible anywhere
from
where
their
it says
perspective, they would.
I've got a different one
it's a
up
man.
than what this person's talking about.
Okay.
What I've got
that
is
bill is withdrawn. Just
the S3540.
Okay.
The 4593, the assembly number 4593.
Oh yeah, no, this one's 3540. Fairness in Women's Sports Act. I'm guessing we can all kind of understand what that's about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Boring. The other one was at least a bit more interesting. Okay.
I mean, it's not. Whether it's interesting or not, I don't really care. It's like,
basically,
if someone's trying to criminalize my existence, like, fuck them if it's interesting or if it's boring, right?
No. Yeah, same here. I'm just like, I mean,
It's been
I'm just saying,
Yeah, you
it's
gotta
just like
run
the
a show. I get
same
it.
mode. Yeah.
Well,
Um,
I think the question to ask would be, if you were a cis male, just not transgender, and you were about to be searched, and you said, "No, I don't want a man searching me. I want a woman to pat me down." Shouldn't she be able to opt out, or should she be forced to search you?
Why
Yeah,
does
but
it
for
matter?
religious reasons, it's ridiculous. I mean,
It
where does it
said
say you can't
religious or
strip?
personal, I'm pretty sure.
I don't think you can opt out for other yeah, for like in terms of like if there's a woman, a cis woman, who needs to be patted down, then and if I'm incorrect on this, please someone correct me. But as I understand it, they have to provide you with another woman to do the pat down, to strip search you, rather than a man strip searching you.
Unless there's no one else available, but yeah, they
Yeah.
usually
But what I'm saying,
Um,
what if you didn't want that? Because that's what this situation is.
no.
I mean, this situation got shot down, so it's not really relevant either way.
But just from what I understand this, right? This person is a trans woman, right? And so what they want is a woman to search them. Like, I'm sorry. Do you understand? Well, maybe I'm not answering your
No,
question.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, what if I, as a man,
Uh-huh.
if I was being searched and I said, no, I don't want another man searching me, I want a woman to search me.
Oh,
I
I see.
believe you
Yeah,
can
right
ask
away.
for that.
Yeah,
I
you can.
what like
Well,
at
the
the
like if
airport
you
they
have
ask
grounds,
you when
sure,
you're going
I
to get patted
guess.
down at least.
Well, the difference is that the reason that like women will ask for male officers to like not pat them down is for like
Oh,
sexual reasons, right? Because they're
Yeah,
like
like
copping a feel, or it's like a safety argument. So like
if
Yeah.
you would say the
if
same
you've had
argument for a
like
trans woman.
exactly if you've had a deeply traumatic experience with another man, like can't bear the thought of him touching you, like
No.
sure, I guess you okay if that's a
Yeah.
problem, like tell it to the officer. I don't fucking care.
Yeah, I would think
Yeah, but
so.
the question is, does that officer have to abide with that request?
Hmm.
That's the issue. So if I go to the airport and they
Yes,
begin
if your
searching,
claim is legitimate, yes, he does have to comply with it.
who gets it's on
Well,
the
New
spot.
Jersey withdrew the bill, so I guess New Jersey has decided that it is a legit. It's not that you're concerned for withdrawing as an officer is.
Holy moly.
Generally speaking, I study criminal justice. So generally speaking, you can choose to have a different individual, obviously, pat you down if you do want a female. When it comes to the cop, they don't generally have a valid reason on why they wouldn't, other than they just simply don't want to do their job, as it's usually not against a religious belief to strip search somebody on average. But so the issue is though, they can deny it and they can ask, their whoever's on the scene. If they're the only ones on the scene, then they can ask one of their partners to do it. So they can deny it. However, if they're the only one available, as I believe somebody else said, they
Yeah, they have to
absolutely
do it.
have to go through with it.
Mhm.
Yes. So they can choose. It's just extremely rare for the officer to deny it because there's usually not much of a reason. And also men don't usually ask for, say, a woman or whatever, but you can do these things. It could theoretically be denied though.
Bringing up in chat, I'm posting where I'm getting my sources on these the legislation being introduced. I got
Okay.
tracker for
The
all
the
that.
reason that I brought it up because the TSA's policy is that the person who searches you, the person who searches you must be a person who matches the gender that you present.
Yep.
And there's a case of a transgender woman who asked to be searched by a woman, but they said no, and they forced her to be searched by a man. So
They'll
that's
get slapped with a heavy lawsuit with that one, I bet.
That's
Yeah,
ran by the
that's a
federal
dick move.
government. This is all like depends on your state and everything. TSA is going to be a federal law, so
hmm
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm gonna say it.
it's going to be completely different in every state that you're in.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Texas is going above and beyond the Call of Duty with this one though. 12 separate bills.
Holy crap.
Good on you, Texas. That's pretty fucked.
Anything we haven't seen before? As far as you know?
I'll take a scan of it. Sure.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Because yeah, we hear a lot about the trans individual in sports. There's a wave of these. It's unbelievable. There's a wave of
Yep.
all these bills. And I
Well,
don't
they
know.
see it as an easy win.
Yeah, it
Throw
must
red
be.
meat to your base.
It must be exactly that because it's like a signal went off, and now like trans kids who were like not a threat before are suddenly the worst of threats. Like, how could we have missed these predators within our communities? Apparently, like it feels like. So
Oh, this one's weird.
Which one?
Relating to the provision of and professional liability insurance coverage for gender transitioning or gender reassignment medical procedures and treatments for children. So it has to do specifically with insurance companies' liability to cover shit like that.
Oh, wonderful.
Which I know is like just a super niche thing, but
it's an important thing though. It's extremely important.
Well,
yeah,
it shows Texas is really covering all its bases here with its transphobia.
The worst kind.
Well, they go big.
Well, are you surprised?
That's what Texas does.
I am surprised because I thought Texans cared about their fellow Texans, but
no,
I guess not. I guess the legislature's telling your fellow Texans to go fuck themselves.
People don't care about trans people.
I mean,
they do. They're just not the ones in systemic power in Texas. It seems.
Yeah, I don't know what the cost of a transition surgery is, but I think
it's a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
So
Very state by state, but always a lot.
Yeah, so if you're a parent and you have an option to make this, well, you don't have the option to make this medical decision about your child, and this surgery is going to cost $20,000. Is they're like, well, who's going to pay for this? If the insurance says it's a quote unquote elective surgery, does the government have to pay for it? Is it on the parents? Like,
yeah, because if you can make it so that insurance companies don't have to cover transition surgeries and stuff like that, you can really, really stick the bill to them.
Yeah. Well, the issue is
that's
as well.
a clever one, Texas.
Well, the issue is as well is that if it's not going to address anything, so if somebody doesn't have, say, dysphoria, or it's not going to further somebody's mental health or general health, on average, the insurance will not cover it. Like a good example that I just have anecdotally, I have Crohn's disease, and so unless I lose a large portion of my weight, they will not supply me with meal replacement shakes, which is generally what they do when you're on a flare-up with Crohn's disease, and I have to pay hundreds of dollars to get that each month in order for me to not be throwing up every day and everything, because I haven't lost an insane amount of body weight within a month span. And so therefore the insurance won't cover it. So honestly, it kind of also encourages people to make their health even worse if they really feel they need some sort of medication or treatment. And so overall, it does seem like just a clever way, as you mentioned, for them to get out of it and stick that large bill to them.
Yeah.
We have one about making it more difficult to or even impossible to change the sex on your birth certificate, which is a cool one.
That's annoying.
Again, a very minor thing, but just like another little needle to be like, "Ha, gotcha."
Yeah. Well, they all add up too.
Well, I mean, I'm going to ask the question: if this is strictly a gender transition, then should you be able to change the sex that you were born with if they're separate?
Yeah, because the sex isn't actually associated with what you're born with. It's like what basically you present as. Because it's like for example, like when you look at an ID, right, you're having the expectation that they're going to present the gender that is like assigned here, like F and M, for example. Just because you say it's a sex, it doesn't mean it actually isn't applicable.
And it's like a really dangerous way to out people too. Like if you get pulled over in the bumfuck nowhere by like a really asshole cop and you look like this and your driver's license says female, that's a nice green light to get in a lot of trouble.
Like a lot of trans women are killed because they get outed.
Yeah.
Like half of these are trans sports bills. Like
so the Texas ones, a lot of them are only one sign off. They're introduced by one person. I'm going through them. There's so far there's only been 2 bills that have more than one person signing off on them. That is
the thing that's like painfully annoying.
I mean,
with
again,
Texas
we'll
doing
have to
that.
see. And these have only been introduced, so they haven't been gone through any. None of these bills, none of the 12 bills, have gone through any kind of committee.
Yeah, they're very young.
So
if I can just take the mic for a second, I don't think it matters how young these bills are. This is a social agenda thing. This is about changing the argument. It's just like how the conservatives moved the abortion debate from making people who got abortions feel bad to criminalizing doctors. They're trying to
Yeah.
criminalize the people who provide trans youth with medical treatment and to make it harder for these people to attain what they need. And that's where they're trying to change their argument, because it's far easier for them to get their base behind that than to get their base against the children, because it's a lot of younger people who are coming out and identifying as trans or non-binary in a lot of newer Pew surveying.
Yeah. So my problem with this is that if it's one state assembly member introducing the bill, it doesn't seem like that there's that much political backing for it, because like one of these bills has 77, right? So we could talk about that, because that seems like that has a lot of political backing. But it's when anybody can introduce a bill, like Prime said earlier. So if it's just one person who's on the fringe of like this political position putting the bill in, it's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't seem like it's going to go anywhere.
But you
I don't think
realize
that's
that
like
you realize that every person introduces a pill technically independently. So like, I'll understand.
But it has no cosigns, 0 cosigns. So one bill has 77 signees, and one bill has 1. Do you think that there's a difference between these two bills?
77? They don't have a cap on it? That's insane.
So
Well,
you
HB
can technically
1458. So HB 1458 has 77 signees on it. So there is one. But then HB 2693, HB 3455, these all have 1. So do you think that there's a difference between the political viability of a bill that has 77 signees and 1 signee?
Yeah, if it has 77, that's got a lot of push on it. I don't know.
I don't think
Is that Texas?
Or do you think that these two bills are like politically the same?
I don't think it's about like the political aspect of it. It's more that like people are feeling comfortable like pushing this legislation, right? Like if you live somewhere when somebody and there was only one person that had this idea and only like one person had this thought or whatever, it would still be a bad thought and it's still damaging to the community, because it shows that like this thought prevalence is becoming more commonplace and it's getting like more bold and like more like wedged into the political sphere.
And also, if it has 1 sponsor, if it has 77, if it passes, it still passes.
It does make a difference.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's just
It's
talking about
so much.
It shows
less
how much
likely to go
weight that
through
bill has
committees
behind
without
it, but
more.
like there are plenty of atrocious bills that have had very little in the way of sponsorship that have managed to get through.
Well, a lot of these too, when they're these smaller bills, are kind of to a degree theater. I mean, a lot of people when they propose these bills, they know it's not going to get through, but it's going to get.
They want to see if there's the political will. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's going to get people thinking about it. Maybe it wasn't
Which is
something
why
you would
it's
have done
good to
before,
smack
but
it
it fits in
down
your
now.
head. Exactly. Yes, I agree.
I wanted to go back quickly to the question of the IDs, and when should IDs be changed, right? So like, should it be changed when people are outwardly trans, whether they're attempting to transition, or should it be done beforehand when they identify themselves as trans?
Whenever the fuck they want.
It doesn't really
Yeah,
matter.
that sounds right.
No. So why I'm asking this is because of what was said previously, right? And that if you have a person who doesn't outwardly match, right, their stated gender, right, that they could cause a lot of difficulty, and so
yeah.
I
mean,
but they like weigh though that like that affirmation means more. Like it's their choice to make the risk versus like not having a choice in it.
Exactly. I would recommend to any trans person considering getting their documentation changed up, probably do it after you feel like you're a decent way into your transition. But if you want to do it sooner, or if you want to do it later, or if you don't want to do it at all, okay, that's like all of those are perfectly valid options to take. I, for one, am never fucking changing my documentation because it's a huge pain in the ass. And I don't want to.
Expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. But I'm a weird case when it comes to trans people. Like my experience ain't everyone's.
You're a unique person in general, I think, Dr. K. I think
I'm a sick little weirdo and I love it.
I haven't encountered anyone quite like you. And I like you a lot though.
Yeah.
But okay. So all right, I think it's a fair answer what you guys and gals are.
I have a question.
Okay, sure.
I wanted to ask, or is it somebody else? Is it not me?
No, you can go if you want. Sure, it's fine.
Okay. I wanted to ask, why do we have gender/sex on driver's license in the first place?
Yeah, because that's actually a good question. It's called people probably want to like be bad, like be harmful in some way. Because you know, like we have a lot of like historical associations of different like categorizations. Like we have like pedigree studies and like all these different things that assign like arbitrary characteristics that really have no influence. So I can't tell you the reason why they did exactly, but it's just really fucking annoying.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, I mean, in the past, people have used obviously male and female to identify people, and obviously it's a horrible identification because somebody can present obviously different than maybe what it says on their ID. But obviously, it's this broken idea that you can just tell, you know, you can better know if that person is that person by knowing their gender. When we know that's not true, because obviously presentation can change. However, you know, the person may feel you or perceive you, etc. So generally speaking, I think that's why it is on the identification card. It shouldn't be though. We don't really need it there. It's kind of useless.
Should we push for it to be removed? I mean, it's not going to like immediately overnight going to be a thing, but should that be like part of the platform is to?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I would
think
say
ideally,
actually,
yeah.
yeah, I think it should be. And one thing that can actually cause a problem is if somebody still is in that binary mindset of male and female. I mean, and this may sound ridiculous, but somebody could say, I don't know, try to present differently if they were trying to get away from the police, and that way trick them into thinking, okay, well, oh, this isn't the individual because this says, you know, female and this person's presenting as a male. So obviously that, I mean, that's a situation that has happened in crimes previously. And so it's just another thing that points to how ridiculous this male and female identification really is and how it can actually be harmful. So yeah, overall, probably not the best idea to have it on there.
Yeah, but when it seems like the transgender movement is based on the strict fact that sex and gender are separate, but it seems like when we go into implementation, it seems like we treat them like they're the same. So
Because there's a little bit of overlap, and we're like restricted in the way that we can like express ourselves in like a like society.
Essentially.
But that's what I mean. You say there's overlap when you're arguing to have things change, but when someone's arguing against having things change, then the argument is, oh no, they're completely separate.
I mean, it depends on what you're talking about, though, because like one is kind of born out of the other, right? Like our current conceptualization of gender is like it overlaps with our conceptualization of sex, right? So like gender is derived from sex in our current understanding, so we're forced to operate within that. So like they are like connected in a way, but like idealistically they wouldn't be.
And the underlying hormones, of course, are naturally what causes various characteristics, which is why obviously when we transition, we'll you know, input the various hormones and whatnot. So overall, that's why that overlap is there, and it's obviously difficult because of that. But they are separate. It's just one can very much influence the other.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it it sounds like that's like it seems like that the first time I've heard that argument is now that we're having the discussion on changing the sex, because I've heard many times even during this panel that they're completely separate. Like when we were talking about the children.
Well, there's two different ways to look at it though, because like we have to understand that there's like an idealistic version of like how we want to exist, like in the absence of like cisgender society, and then like how it pragmatically is and how we're forced to operate within like the current structure of society.
Yes, and but that's the thing that when people are arguing against the movement, they're saying that, hey, no, they're not separate. In our society, they are connected. But then the trans movement says, no, they're not connected. That's just society's implementation of it, and we don't agree with that.
Well, what do you
But
think?
it's like there's like double speak.
Well, also
Usually
that's
when
because
people-
Go ahead, sorry.
Usually when people say they're not connected, they mean there's no causal link. And that might just be like a semantic argument.
But you just like a couple seconds ago, you said there was a causal link, and that the biology does cause certain effects that happens.
Well, no. Like there's an overlap because like the way that we like structure society. So like you're born a man, you have all of these expectations that are like loosely tied to biological sex. Like men are physically stronger, they should do physical labor. Men are like more rough and like rugged, so they have facial hair and they don't care as much about their physical appearance. Like these things like have roots in biological sex, and like we ascribe that to that. So they're like they're not like they don't necessitate each other, but they're connected in the way that we like understand them in society.
And also women can you know, biological women can have higher testosterone levels that will make them appear more masculine in various ways, cause more muscle, etc. So it's just that you know that we would still consider that to be a woman.
Stop,
However,
hold on, stop for a second. Wordy, I need you to mute. I can hear you typing. Keep hearing you typing. So mute, please.
You can hear me typing?
Yes, yes, yes.
Jesus Christ. I
We
didn't
did
realize
last
the
time
microphone
too.
was that loud. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So all I was saying is, yeah. Generally speaking, we associate, say, things that are more masculine, or things that testosterone causes, with being male. However, these things are not exclusive to male. You can see female bodybuilders. You can see various different things where people are born with different testosterone levels, estrogen levels, etc. So they're not even unique to what we already assume to be male and female. It's just these are things we generally ascribe because of the way that gender has been overlaid onto our society.
Okay. All right. I think maybe we've got it.
Yeah,
Do we want to move on
yeah,
to the next
yeah.
topic?
There are a lot of nasty bills. I'm
Mm.
just it is really fascinating like browsing through all of these.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know what like why is it exactly this moment? You know what? I'm curious if it has anything to do with Trump leaving office. I'm honestly curious about that because okay, you have a different.
I think
Looking for the next big rallying
Yeah,
cry.
I think like as like I guess the right loses more arguments on certain things like gay marriage, they're just looking for the next like rallying cry.
No.
to, like-
I hear that, and yeah, we know they've definitely been doing that for quite a while. But I'm talking about this specific push for bills, right? That seems to have sprung up. Like I feel like hold on. I feel like maybe might be because Trump is out of office. Like the left is, well, the liberals anyway are ascendant. And the right at this point doesn't have anything else to offer. Like what are they going to offer the people? What policies do they have available, like policy solutions? What do they have other than these things, right? Like
you assume that Republicans work on a rational based system in the party.
They do,
Yeah.
just not your basis, right? So it's interesting because they're doing this thing and they're also doing the border crisis talking line thing again as well, right? So really, essentially, they're looking for the next big thing they can essentially throw as like a big, piece of meat to their base to make them all angry and incensed and fighting over, right? Because right now they really don't have one strong unifying thing to bitch about, right? And they're just trying to get that right now.
Yeah, I feel like this is as closest to a unifying message as they have, which is such a weak one. We hate trans kids. Like this is the best you've got. Like this is what they have.
Yeah, it's that and the border facility stuff. They're also really
and the
on
border
right now.
Yeah. That's I think it's just incredible weakness. No policy solutions, nothing whatsoever to offer individuals. So yeah, I guess trans people are attacking you, and your restrooms, even though you have no evidence of that. This was not a thing for years and years, but now
and they're still playing their classics too,
Yeah.
like corporatocracy and shit like that, right? So
I feel like they lost on the gay thing, so now they have to move to like the next thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what
so
I
if they have something really big to throw, right? And then they can also throw their small stuff of like small government, limited government, shit like that, on end, right? Like they can cobble together essentially something vaguely resembling a platform.
Okay.
The vaccine passports is another one that they're doing right now.
Yeah. Those are funny. The vaccine. That's actually really funny. So I was. So I did have a subject picked out. There was an attack. In New York City, I believe. I believe it's New York City against an elderly Asian woman of 65 years old, I believe. And like it's a really vicious attack. And there were bystanders watching and like not acting at all. And so I'm wondering, like, let's say you saw someone being attacked, being threatened. Do you feel like you have the responsibility to step in?
So I guess I'll step up here. I don't think that that there's you should feel a responsibility to step in. I think that a lot of people, your first instinct is going to be to jump in. I mean, I've had situations before where I saw something. I mean, even a dog fight like that, I tried to break apart, which is stupid. These things are stupid, but for some people, like it's just a natural instinct to try to jump in. It's probably not the best idea. You have no idea what the weapon that might be. However, at the same time, if somebody is being viciously beat, I mean, again, it's not your responsibility, but I feel like most people will feel a strong moral need to jump in and try to do something there.
Okay, whoa. I don't think you can make that argument that people have an inherent need or desire to jump in and assist.
I kind of agree with that.
But
I think they do have the desire. I don't think you should have for example, the reason I bring this up, there was a case where there were 4 young boys. This is a little bit different. However, this is a bystander situation. There were 4 young boys. There was a guy who was drowning in a lake. They recorded it and they did not go to help him. There were several people that said they should have jumped in. They should have went and saved this man because he then drowned to death. However, the argument is, well, you know, he could usually if somebody's drowning and you don't have, say, a life preserver, etc., they'll drag you down with them. Also, cops, when you know, I study criminal justice. The main thing they say is bystanders. They don't want you to get involved. You have no idea if the person has a knife, a gun, anything else, and they'd rather you call the cop. Now, again, that how you feel about the cops, etc., changes all this, which is another reason some people have, I think, even more of a desire because they don't want to call the cops and get them involved, especially with the various situations we've had, of course, with the police recently. But again, I'm saying I think that the desire is there. It's a natural desire to want to jump in and break that up because, of course, like nobody wants to see anybody being beaten or etc. But I think when we're talking about do you have a responsibility, I don't think you have the responsibility to jump in.
Can you cite any like evidence of people having a natural desire to jump in? Because what happens is like you would need to be able to demonstrate like a consistent behavior amongst the population to be able to make that argument.
I suppose. I mean, so what I suppose I'm saying here is like, for example, where there were people, and what happens a lot is people do freeze up. So, for example, when the George Floyd situation, there were several people that did try to somewhat intervene, but there were several people also that said that they wanted to intervene, but they had no idea what to do. And there was a girl who, you know, they brought into the court case. She had recorded some of it, and she said, you know, at night she wondered like, what could I have done to save this person's life? Now, again, this is something that I'm kind of just saying because I don't think every single person has this. I'm not saying that it can be properly demonstrated with statistics or etc. But I think for most people, when you see something horrible happening, you have a desire to stop it. Now, again, and maybe that's not the case. Maybe I'm going based off of my own emotions and a couple of the other people that I've seen discuss this or that I know. But generally, that's my take on it.
So, okay. Do you guys?
Sam, you were wanting to say something?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you, Sam.
So like I guess like the idea is that like this is just like the bystander effect in practice, right? So
Yes.
when it seems like when things are dangerous, people are more likely to get involved even with the bystander effect, but that doesn't guarantee that people are going to. So there's a lot of people, if there's a lot of people around watching, if there's like cameras around, people aren't going to get involved because they think someone else is going to get involved, right? That's just like a psychological like thing that we know. So even if people have like even interviewing afterwards, people have been said that I wanted to get involved, but I thought someone else would, so I'm not going to get involved because like they think of like the too many cooks scenario. Some people in chat were posting about this as well.
So, in terms of George Floyd, I think it's slightly different, at least slightly different, because those were officers, right?
True.
Like, what do? You best you can do to call officers. If you assault an officer, then you're going down, right? Like that's like straight up you're going down. So like and also they did so like you were mentioning smoking. Sorry, what was your what would you like to call it again?
Oh, Rocky.
Rocky, excuse me. Sorry, Rocky. You were saying
You're good. You're good.
Rocky, that you know you don't know if the person has a weapon. Well, we definitely know these officers were armed, right?
For
So,
sure.
yeah.
Yes. I was just trying to, you know, mention in somewhere where I heard somebody have an innate feeling of it. Yes, it's totally different with George Floyd. Even the drowning thing is a different situation. But it is overall the bystander effect. That's probably I should have just used that terminology. And generally speaking, yes. I mean, people will see a car crash and they don't call 911 because they think, oh well, everybody driving by on the highway is going to call 911. So yeah, I totally agree there. And each situation is very different. But I mean, the main thing I wanted to make the point on was the responsibility aspect, because I just don't feel you should have the responsibility, especially legally. But it would be great if you could stop that. I'm not saying morally it would be the best thing to do, but having it as a responsibility, either legally or etc., it gets a little fuzzy for me.
So let me ask you a question. Why do you think people should not have a responsibility? Like
Because
fundamentally, why do you think?
So again, when we go back to that drowning story, for example, that person could have, if they went to go try to save this drowning man, could have dragged them down and caused their death as well, which, when you look at drowning situations, is the most likely thing to occur, which is why lifeguards will throw preservers, etc., to try to drag you back in, because generally speaking, they'll bring you down with them. You don't know, say, when somebody has a knife, or you don't know if somebody has a weapon overall. So they, and this is generally, what I had learned in criminal justice, they on average don't want bystanders jumping in, because then it can make it either more dangerous, where, let's say, especially in places where guns are completely allowed, etc., if you have a bunch of bystanders getting in. There was a story where a guy had seen there was somebody robbed a gas station, or was attempting to. The cashier and the robber kind of switched sides, and a guy came in and he saw these two guys pointing guns at each other, and he ending up killing cashier because he was on the other side, because they did a little switcheroo. And so that bystander ended up killing the person who was being robbed. So these are situations where the people do jump in, and it causes just more issues. So when it comes to putting a responsibility on them, either legally or etc., I don't think that's the best choice, because these people are coming into the situation a lot of time not knowing exactly what's going on. They don't have any training for these things. And overall, that's why I think that generally it could make it worse, and you don't really, that's where it gets fuzzy. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, may I?
You can go. I have an idea, but you go first.
Yeah, you go first, then
Okay.
Strawberry.
Well, I'll just mainly talk about the Floyd incident in Minneapolis. Minneapolis has a law for duty to intervene. So the police officers, the other three, were supposed to intervene in that action, which is why they're charged with aiding and abetting, because they failed to do that. And shortly after the murder of George Floyd, we passed a bill, the Police Accountability Bill, which made it so duty to intervene was then statewide. But my problem with that was it didn't do anything in the first place. I hope it does something in the future. And apparently New York State has this also. And I don't know who those people were in that video, if they're like security or whatever, if they're supposed to intervene by law because there's security or police or whatever. So I'm not really sure, but some states have duty to intervene. So, which is not on the citizens itself, but on like, security.
Yeah, I only know. Go ahead. Sorry.
Strawberry.
I get the some situations where you don't know what's going on, but if we're talking particularly about this situation, we're talking about an elderly woman on the ground getting stomped and kicked on. I don't think it takes too much, cognitive ability to be able to see what's going on and that it needs to be stopped. So, sit here and compare this to a situation where, two people have a gun and you don't know who has a gun, or there are two people fighting and you don't know who started the fight. I think that's significantly different from this situation where you have a person on the ground just getting stomped on. Like, you should stop that. But I think that's pretty simple.
So if I could now,
Please.
Sad Rocky. So there's a series of issues I have with your argument. Is
Okay.
We also have legal concepts that exist of like whenever you say, for example, you are engaging in a relationship, like a business between a business, right? And what happens is you're expected to fulfill a certain set of responsibilities that you both agree upon, right? And what happens is there's also some instances of a reasonable inferment, like if business is hosting another business, that you're expected to have a degree of cleanliness and healthiness. And the idea is responsibility, and the failure to act upon that is like a term of negligence. And we can also, like, to some extent, there are also, like, for example, if a person's being murdered and you have a responsibility in some extent of, like, reasonably preventing that. If you have the capability, I would have to look, like, I was in mock trial, so, like, I have some, like, understanding to some extent, even though I'm not a lawyer, that there's, like, there are certain instances where you have responsibility to engage in, like, solve those issues themselves, and the extent that you also have, like, levels of, like, negligence in that instance. And I would say that make the argument that if you're going to take away the responsibility in that instance, you basically would be able to apply that to other people. Like, if we're taking this to, like, the idea that people shouldn't have a responsibility to fulfill it, you could say a business shouldn't have a responsibility to ensure good products to its people. So
Generally
that's the
speaking,
issue I have with it.
well, generally, what we're speaking of is it's another version of vigilante justice in a way. Obviously, if you're going to attempt to take a criminal down rather than allowing the state police to do so, generally speaking, they do not encourage that. Now, there are things such as citizens arrest and things like that, but even in certain states, they've done away with that, and it can be considered kidnapping. This has been the case in a couple cases. I mostly know California law. That's what, because I study here in California. So generally speaking, that's what I'm most aware of. And to make a point, I believe Strawberry had said, when we obviously write the law, generally it has to be painted with a broad stroke. So when you say you have to intervene with intervene with a crime that's going on or to stop something, I would agree that in this situation of the older, Asian lady, of course, that would be something that, again, I would say most people would innately want to get in and stop. However, when we make it something where it's legally, you have the responsibility to do so, which is more of what I was kind of getting towards, then it causes you to have the responsibility in the other situations as well, such as the one where somebody may have a gun, etc. So usually they're not going to write in there, if it's an older Asian lady, or if it's an older lady, or if it's an older man, then you can go ahead and intervene and try to stop it. Or if you have other beliefs of, oh no, I don't see a gun, or etc., then I can go try to stop it. Generally, it'll just be, no, you have a responsibility to do something if you see it. Now, this is another thing we have is generally drugs, right? If you see an overdose, they do have it where you're allowed to call in and they won't arrest you because they do want to, get that person to not overdose, etc. So there are things that do protect Good Samaritans, the Good Samaritan laws in general. However, making it a legal requirement is where it gets messy for me. I would agree morally, it's the best thing to probably try to step in, but logically at the same time, it depends on the situation. Again, with this situation, seems pretty cut and dry, but overall, most of these situations are not that cut and dry. I haven't seen the video of this, if there is video, or I haven't read the article. But generally speaking, yeah, at least in California, I know they do not encourage you to intervene unless somebody is having a drug overdose, or if somebody's having a seizure, they recommend you turn them aside. Generally, medical issues, etc., is what they ask you to intervene on. When it's something that's criminal, such as somebody's getting robbed, mugged, beaten, etc., they generally want to call the cops rather than intervene.
So,
Well, but in direct contradiction to, like, your point of, like, person accidentally shooting, there are also instances of people who do intervene in those instances of crime, and they do prevent those crimes. So, like if you show an example here, I can show an example. So in that instance, instead of, like, going on these specific instances and trying to apply a broad trend, we would have to divide, like, a general, like, level of responsibility where we
Well,
can
also,
determine from there.
I'm also not saying that you should be required to abstain from intervening either. I'm saying if you feel that you can intervene and stop it, even if I think maybe you're, misguided and you probably shouldn't do that, if it's like a really, touchy situation, if you want to do that, I think you should be able to go ahead and do so. However, if you killed the wrong person or you fuck up somehow, then you're going to reap the consequences of that. But I don't think we should make it to where you have the responsibility legally to jump in. But again, you should also not have the responsibility to abstain from it either. It should be something where you take on that decision and then you take on the outcome of that. If you end up helping this person in self-defense, then obviously you have a case. If you end up like in that gas station situation, killing the cashier, obviously that's a homicide, and now he is behind bars for an extended period of time for murder. So it just kind of depends on the situation. I'm just simply saying you should not be legally required to jump in, but also I'm not saying you should have to abstain either.
Yeah, I
So-
agree. I think that you can have like a moral obligation to help somebody in a lot of these situations, but I'd say that to like legally enforce that you need to intervene, like during like a fight or something, that I don't know if I could buy into that. I'm sort of with
It's a
Yeah,
little-
that's only
yeah, it gets
supposed to be for police officers.
Yes.
Well, hold on.
I'm
They don't
trying
have
to-
a duty to intervene, right?
Yeah.
No, they don't.
Yeah, they don't have a duty to intervene.
They don't.
Where?
No, like literally, we've had like a series of case law where cops don't have a
Yes.
duty to intervene.
No, certain.
No,
many
where?
states do, for sure.
You're not telling
like,
me where.
Let me find the evidence. I could
Because
point
in
post it
Minnesota
Twitch chat.
there is. In New York State there is.
It's state
I
dependent.
literally
I've
had
read
to write
articles.
the law
I'm pretty sure it's not even in New
in
York
my
State.
state. Yes, it is.
No, it's not. Like, I'll literally pull it up. I have it on my evidence doc. Give me a minute.
Okay.
And I mean, this kind of goes, get to the George Floyd, I like that situation with the two guys with the gun. It seems like we give the cops a lot more leeway because the person who saw a crime happening and he went in there, shot the wrong person, now he's in jail. But if the cop went in there and said, "Hey, I thought this was a criminal and I shot him," I think he would be under some type of immunity that he was trying to serve and protect, but they were both trying to do the same thing. So I don't think they should be treated differently, just like I don't think those cops should be treated, like any differently just because they were officers. What they were doing was clearly wrong. So I think there needs to be some sort of consistency across the board and not just distinguish, well, if you're a regular citizen, intervening in this case is wrong or right, but if you're a cop, it's okay and you're alleviated from responsibilities or the consequences.
What about morally? Because we spent a lot on this legal issue. But morally, what do you think? Should you have a duty to intervene for like a situation that was similar to that, in terms of the Asian woman tragically being attacked, or for other reasons? Do you think you have a moral obligation?
I think that it depends on who you are. Like, I'd say that in that situation where the Asian woman was attacked, I'd say that Dwayne The Rock Johnson probably has different obligations, like, in that situation than my grandma does, right? So I think you need to, like, seriously assess your own abilities. And if your abilities, like, correspond well to the situation, I'd say it is actually possible for you to have a moral obligation. Like, for example, say someone's choking in, like, a restaurant or something like that. I think that if you're a doctor or you know CPR, you probably actually have a moral, like, responsibility to help them out. But I'd say that if you don't know CPR, you probably just shouldn't engage with it at all. So that's probably the line of thinking that I take when it comes to that. It's completely Asian dependent.
Does anyone disagree that you should have a moral
Disability
obligation?
justice. I dropped the links in Twitch chat for you if you want to check those out. Basically, cops do not have a duty to intervene.
I mean, even in that choking situation,
This is in 2005.
Yeah, a case that still applies.
No.
Yeah, also, it looks like
even in that choking situation, if you don't do anything, that person chokes and dies. So, even if I'm not trained in CPR and I see someone choking, for me to just sit there and say, well, I don't know CPR, so I'm just going to sit here and watch, like, I don't see how morally that's right.
Morally, I agree with you, but legally, then, not to take it back, sorry, but legally, and if you cause harm to that individual, you will be held responsible for it, which is why if you're not properly trained, they say not to intervene, because like you could break their rib if you do it wrong, etc. Could puncture a lung through breaking the rib. These are things that have happened. So, and to just bring it back to the moral question, I think that I'm generally more of a consequentialist. Can't say that word. Point is, generally, I think if you're assessing a situation and you have a generally good idea and you feel you can intervene and this overall negative thing from happening, then you should do so. You would have the moral obligation to do so if you can stop it. However, it's a situation where you're going to end up getting yourself potentially killed or very much hurt, then I don't think that you would have the moral obligation to step in because you're not going to be able to help anything. But that's my general take on the moral aspect of it.
I'm going to say, generally, I think ethical language is rather nonsensical. However, I think when considering these things, you have to consider the status of Good Samaritan laws in the area and whether or not you're legally liable for your actions based upon your training and the way that you intervene.
Well, thank for being here. The new person whose name is
Cheers.
Sorry, what?
Cheers.
Cheers.
Space
Cheers.
beard.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for being here. Really appreciate you stopping by. Okay. So, I was wondering. Also, Nuke. Sorry, before I say anything, Nuke, you want to say something?
No, I was going to bring up it. Basically, a lot of people here are talking about it as a legal issue, and a lot of that comes down to the Good Samaritan laws, and where your responsibility to act and the outcome really comes down to what your intentions in acting were. Did you think the person was in enough danger for you to take action? Was it reasonable for you to take action? And I think a lot of that stuff is stuff we really haven't fleshed out in law, and it comes out in individual cases and in individual situations and with individual people's means. But if we're looking at it as a moral issue alone and we don't look at that consequence aspect of it and think about people suing us and all of that, I think we do have a bit of an obligation to act in circumstances where we can produce a more positive outcome, or we think we can. To ignore it is to say that I'm ignoring other people's suffering.
Well, I think you have to take into account the location. So, for example, in some regions of the Arab Peninsula, right, the Arabian Peninsula, you're going to run into some subcultures of people that would consider it morally apprehensible to intervene, at least within a given period of time, right? Because they see it as interfering with the will of their God, right? So, are you saying that this is a universally applicable moral standard, or is this just like within your personal framework?
I guess I'm assuming that we're pushing for a more desirable and global style of care ethic. We're looking at it as each person as a humanitarian issue and as an aspect of a greater whole, not as a sort of religious moral structure. I'm saying we're looking at people as things we should care about.
Yeah, so generally, I don't care about a person's religious belief on the social imperative to act here. It's more of like you have to look at an ethical standard and then to some extent apply it to the legal standard, because like I don't think having like an example of a person, like a different group of people, I think in this instance you have to look at the context of America. And we could take some examples in instances, but I think as a whole it doesn't really apply. So ultimately, the complicated topic here is, yeah, there are going to be people who are going to cause harm to an extent because they intervene itself, but generally, I think the issue here is we're not addressing is that people are often socialized to rely on power structures instead of relying on a community effort. So, like, for example, we are taught to like trust the police. We are taught to like think that they are going to intervene and cause the best outcomes in that situation. When in reality, the cops really don't do that. They fuck everything up. And in that instance, I think teaching community responsibility and having like that social level of effect, you know, like the legal standard and whatever, but like socially, we need to teach people to be responsible for their fellow human being. This way, we can decrease the amount of harm that is going to occur. Like you're going to have outliers always, but as a general trend, we can decrease the amount of harm that is going to occur by teaching social responsibility.
Yeah, and on top of that, we could do things such as making sure everybody is CPR certified and whatnot. But just to get and things along those lines, quick point, just to a little bit back. When we talk about Samaritans and we talk about is it reasonable for you to intervene, or gross negligence is another thing in California that they take into consideration. Generally, that is where are you trained in CPR? If not, then it would not generally be reasonable for you to intervene because you had no reason to believe you would be able to cause some better good because you were never trained to begin with. And obviously CPR, even professionals will break ribs a lot of the time. So it's a very dangerous thing. But so generally, I would agree that probably the law needs to be more fleshed out. And if we could teach people things such as more CPR training or self-defense, etc., so that way people don't have to rely on, say, the cops as much, etc., de-escalation, so that way people know how to keep control of their tempers and try to bring other people down. These things would be very positive, and I would definitely be in favor of them for sure.
Does anyone think that you shouldn't intervene? morally?
I think
I would say
maybe
that.
Reach.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
my contention is that I feel I mean, somebody brought it up that it does depend. Like they gave the example of Dwayne the Rock Johnson and their grandmother, but I just in general for all people, I think I have a issue with um placing moral responsibility on somebody else to put their life on the line when they didn't sign up for that. Especially like we were giving the cases of it in the legal sense, but I think even in a moral sense, if you don't know all of the situation that is involved, I don't know if you necessarily are obligated to put your life on the line. Like if somebody's mugging somebody around the corner, I do think um, you should seek help for that situation, but I don't think that you should go and like jump around the corner and try and be Batman or whatever. I don't think that you physically going and intervening is the moral obligation there.
So there's a child being dragged into a van. And you know very well that this child is being kidnapped. Like, this is happening right now. Going to be dragged into a van. Obviously, no time to get anyone else. Do you have the moral obligation to intervene?
I'm gonna go out.
Um,
This might be a little bit, meta here, but I'm gonna say that no such thing as a moral obligation exists.
I have
I mean,
some
that's
Why?
one position.
I think
Do you not believe in morality?
I think your moral obligation should
No.
come down to how much information you know about the situation.
So,
Now,
Let them finish.
exactly what Prime just said. You know, he explained the situation where you actually saw the crime being committed from the beginning to the end. If you walk upon and you see a young child and you do not see, and you see the child, you see the act being started, you have enough information to say, I know definitively what's going on. So at that point, I would think that it's that's more that's more that's it's easier to make a judgment. There's another layer to that, which I was going to bring up in a second, but but another one is a harder one would be if you came and didn't know what they were fighting about, because for all you know, the child could have been doing something to this person. Now, I'm not justifying the act in any way, but I think that your level of responsibility sometimes should come down to your amount of information you have at the moment. Because before I woke up, I just got up and I was listening to the panel. And there was something I wanted to bring up that I missed earlier, and it had to do with coming to someone's aid and the repercussions of it. Because I personally know of a case where someone was murdered. 3 people were murdered trying to help someone, and the now everyone was there. Everyone had all the information, but it still came out negatively for the people that tried to help. Luckily, the person was caught, but it took up to 3 or 4 people, and it was also filmed on video before the person was apprehended and put in jail. And prior to that situation, the day before, the person tried to attack a friend of my girlfriend's, and the person fought that person off. The officers showed up, and the officers didn't particularly do much to this person. The officer, she maced the person, and then the officers just kind of brushed it off. So that is a situation where, people were willing to help and people lost their lives helping. Obviously, this person is in jail now, but, it was a very complicated issue, and it brought a lot of heartbreak to a lot of people. But, the 3 people that were trying to help were also trying to help save 2 young girls who were being accosted and attacked.
That's
Okay.
true. Although I wouldn't say that if there's like any risk at all, you can't have a moral responsibility for something. Like for example, say that there's like a stranger outside your door and it's like freezing weather and they're 100% gonna die in the cold if you don't let them in, right? I'd still argue that you probably have a moral responsibility to let them in, even though it's entirely possible that person might have like a gun on them or something like that. Obviously, you should vet for that a little bit beforehand, but I wouldn't say I wouldn't, or even to strengthen this a little bit more. It could be a child. Let's say it's a child outside, because we don't usually associate a child with having a gun. It's entirely possible that that kid could have a gun, and it could pose some risk to you. But I would still say that you have to let that child like into your house, so that you have more responsibility to. So I wouldn't say that more responsibilities need to always have absolutely zero risk. So I think the discussion here is about how much risk we're like willing to have someone take in order
Yeah.
to be morally responsible.
Well, also, I think it comes down to capability as well. You know, obviously, if there's a Marine that sees this child being kidnapped and he has tons of training in combat, etc., he might be way more well equipped than like, you know, a teenager who is 18 and, you know, doesn't know anything about fighting, etc. Or, you know, somebody who even is in a wheelchair. I don't think you would say that they would have the same exact obligation because they can't intervene at the same capability on average. So it's both
100%.
knowledge and capability for sure.
I 100%
Yeah.
agree. I've seen people use something as small as announcing in broad daylight to the person that the police are coming, and it's kind of made the person right there who's attacking either stop or leave, because something as strong as the threat of being getting caught in the act, or you know, sometimes people like encircling the person, but you never know once again if the person is willing to lash out, like, you know, violently to the point of like, you know, or might have an extra weapon. So, you know, as a person like me who, you know, I've trained martial arts for a few years, you know, I definitely know how to fight, but after like being through numerous situations and altercations, you know, as I get older, my level of willingness to jump into violent occurrences is lowered and lowered, because I know the situations where people, you know, you have a certain amount of personal distance, you know, where, you know, if you do any kind of martial arts, you understand that like wherever their hands are, you got to pay attention. You know, most people don't know that small detail. It's like the closer you get, you know, the closer they are to harming you. So you have to make those judgment calls, and most people don't have any of that kind of knowledge. They'll just walk right into someone's grasp, and you know, as something as simple as a backward slash will put you in the hospital.
Yeah, I think the issue we see nowadays is with social media and viral videos is you see people getting beat up in fights, and there's 15 people there. Everyone's rushing to pull out their phone to videotape it, and no one's doing anything because they don't even. I mean, I wouldn't say they lack the moral, you know, responsibility, but they don't feel the need or the empathy to try to assist something, but they just want to videotape it and say I was there. Like, I mean, that's what I see in today's culture.
Wait,
I
do
just
you
want to
not
jump in
think that
really
would
quick.
happen without social media still? Like if people are just sitting there and watch, you, like,
I mean, I think
There's a
it's
certain.
I think it's better that people are filming it, because at least you have the video evidence. You know, some people
there's
may, you know,
you
some
know,
people may, before it used to be hearsay. Before it would be like, all right, somebody gets beat up, somebody gets jumped, and then now it's the police going through neighborhoods, going and picking up eyewitnesses, and you could actually pick up the wrong person. You know, that's another layer to it. You know what I mean? Now with all the cameras and all the people with cameras running around, it's like if someone does something and gets away, within 2 or 3 days, you could have a definitive identification of the person, as opposed to back in the day when people weren't pulling out cameras or people didn't have access to video, and the person could just walk off, you know, move to the next town, be gone, you know, and then you have the what's it called? Then you have the imprecise skill of eyewitness testimony. You know what
Yeah,
I
but
mean? Which is one of
So
the worst, which is one of the most unreliable things, and even drags more people into the misery, because now if you're a cop who has some kind of weird vendetta, you could just go pick up the local troublemakers, you know, teenagers who are just drinking beers down the street. You know what I mean? So for me, yes, there is a moral, like, yeah, maybe you could say that just filming it is like morally reprehensible, but also you could say that that is also a tool for the application of justice.
I just
the
want to jump in
reason
really quick
all
and
of
say
you
that
guys
I'm
know
gonna
who
head out.
George Floyd
Okay,
is
have a good
Take
because
it easy.
somebody
Have a
filmed
great
it.
night.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
So given the reality that morality doesn't have any material effect other than guiding someone's personal actions based on their personal moral presumptions, I think an argument can be made that there's higher utility in a situation for society in general in filming and distributing information about specific occurrences than intervening. Because if you film and distribute information, that could lead to changes in the legal system, changes within the behavior of the state, changes within systems of actual power, right? Rather than just, these sort of arbitrary and ultimately impotent moral value judgments.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. Forcing someone to be like a martyr or whatever, like because it'll have better like systemic change. I don't know if I agree with that, to be honest.
So Space Beard, I want to go
stop it from happening. Like you say it like it's a certainty that this person's going to be beat up, but that it's not. It's only a certainty because no one's doing anything and they're letting it happen. So to say that it serves better to have evidence of something when you could stop that something from happening.
Yeah, but you have again. We made this statement earlier that like trying to stop someone from being violently, attacked. Yeah, it's one thing. But if you're not good at crime stopping, and you end up being the one put in the box, there's a different situation now. I'm talking about mayhem. One person, in my example, killed 2 people, put 1 in the hospital, when 3 people were an entire train. And it's actually a case in the news. It was the Jeremy Christensen murder at Portland, Oregon. My girlfriend was at the trial. One of her personal friends was the one that was attacked the day before. She only survived because she pepper sprayed the person and fought him off. And the next day he showed up after the police knew what he was up to. The next day he showed up on the train and went back and attacked 2 more women. So, I understand what you're saying. Yes, there's a moral obligation, but an entire train car full of people couldn't stop this one person from killing 2 other people and putting 1 in the hospital.
That's
I think
you would
one
be
thing that needs to be considered is people generally have, preconceived notions about the effects of their actions, right? And I generally don't believe that people have any idea what the consequences of anything that they do. So going into a situation like that, when you're evaluating these supposed moral obligations, first of all, you're going to have to understand your moral framework. Then you're going to have to, if that is dependent upon the outcome, you're going to have to factor in your own personal ignorance of the outcome of your actions and your intervention.
Space Beard, so wait. So I want to go down a bit of a rabbit hole here. You said earlier that you don't believe morality exists. Is that right?
No, I believe morality exists as a certain type of behavior.
He's a moral relativist. He doesn't
No,
believe,
not.
and then okay, so I'm confused.
I'm a
then.
moral non-cognitivist.
A what? What? Okay,
Oh boy.
Okay.
Non-cognitivist. So
I don't believe,
would you
I don't
agree
believe that
that
ethical language has any kind of coherent meaning?
do you? So let me ask this: would you agree that morality is the product of social factors? Basically, people construct morality in order to reinforce society.
I would say that morality is the way that I define it. Morality is a category, like a type of behavior, right?
Okay.
That is associated with adherence to a certain set of morals. Morals being sort of presumed value judgments, right, based upon certain behaviors and certain properties of certain things, right? And that we as biopsychosocial creatures, our entire consciousness is informed by our culture. So yes, but not just morality.
So it feels like a good guy with a gun.
So what you're telling me
Not
is
the gun.
So what you're telling me is Nazis thinking they're good people is okay.
What I'm telling you is that there's no such thing as a good person.
So what you're telling me is it's okay for Nazis to kill Jews.
No, what I'm telling you is that there's no such thing as a good or bad action.
So a Nazi can kill a Jew, and you can't judge them for it.
Okay, dog, that's really lowbrow and annoying. I think you should listen to what I'm saying. Instead
But
of playing
I want
that
you to...
what you're saying is Nazis XYZ, all right?
Because it's a really valid example.
No, it's not.
Because
I
what
didn't
you're doing
say-
is you're
saying
I'm
that there's no objective meaning to the words good and bad is not the same thing as saying X behavior is not bad.
Okay, one time. Everyone shut up for a second. Everyone shut up. Thanks. Great. So we got one at a time. So this new person has come and joined us, and stated that their position. Okay, and we find it interesting because it is interesting. But they can only respond to one question, so we're just like hammering this person, and they can't respond. They can't participate. All right. So one at a time. All right. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Hello.
Can I ask a question to the young man?
Okay, please go ahead.
All right. So if you don't think that there's any moral good or bad, what keeps you from doing what people would consider good or bad actions? You don't have, if you say that there's no morality, what keeps you personally, and I'm not attacking you personally, and what is it that keeps you from doing things that would be considered negative to society?
Usually utilitarian judgment, whether or not, like, going through my day-to-day, like, I don't know. To be honest with you, like, give me an example. Like, why don't I steal my groceries rather than paying for them? I would say because the consequences based upon power.
Okay, why do you consider yourself maybe even? Do you consider yourself a leftist? Do you consider yourself?
No.
Do you consider, because you said utilitarianism? So obviously you want the greater good for the society at whole.
No, I didn't say utilitarianism.
Okay. Then
I said I'm making a utility judgment based upon what I think outcomes might be. We have to do some degree of that. I admit that I can't really know the ultimate outcome of any of my actions, but for example, when I go to the grocery store, why do I take the carrots that I put in my grocery bag? Why don't I steal those rather than paying for them? Well, it's not because I feel any moral obligation to pay for them. It's because the state has power and they will do violence against me if I steal those carrots.
Which could you extend that to, like, for example, if you steal food from your neighbor itself, and if you would not get any consequences from it? So, like, basically, if you could steal something and you can meaningfully avoid the consequences, would you steal it?
Depends on the circumstances and who I'm stealing from.
Okay, so you basically are saying that the only thing keeping you from doing things that people would not deem as...
No, what I'm saying is I try to avoid presumptive general value judgments, right? So, like, the idea that stealing is bad, right? I try to avoid that, and I try to evaluate things on a totally situational
I
basis.
understand that. I understand it, because somebody could be, because we live in a society where it's unfair. People could be hungry. A homeless person,
correct?
They could steal something. That I understand. I'm not saying that's. I mean, to me, I would say that's sort of moral. If there's someone does get hurt, that's sort of moral. But what I'm trying to find out from you, like I'm saying, I'm not trying to attack you or come at you, but what I'm trying to find out from you is what keeps you from doing. I'm not a fan of.
I mean, again, it's situationally dependent.
Just hear me out. Just hear me out.
Can I ask a question?
Before
objective morality.
Hold on. I'm not a fan of total libertarianism, because total libertarianism kind of just devolves into, like, warlord mentality, or like might means right. What keeps you from following might means right? Because if you have enough power, it doesn't matter.
That's reality.
No.
All right.
Wait.
I mean, literally, the only thing that exists is power, and those in power define what.
Hold on. All right, pause for a second. Everyone, pause for a second. Pause for a second. First of all, this new person. And what was your name again? Beard guy.
Just you can call me.
Sorry?
You want my username? You can call me Space Beard. You can call me Nick, whatever.
Nick. Okay. Well, Nick. All right. Sure. You said you're ethical. What was it?
Non-cognitivist. I would say specifically I'm an emotivist.
Oy boy.
Ethical, non-cognitive.
I'm an emotivist. So basically, I don't think that there's any sort of... to put it simply, when you say something is good or something is bad, what you're doing is you're engaging in a psychological projection. You're projecting it sort of linguistically as a property.
Is anyone else having trouble with the Discord right now? Hold on. Sorry.
It's kind of lagging on my end too.
It's lagging hard for everyone else? Okay, so it's not just...
It's lagging a little bit.
So the difference between me and an error theorist is an error theorist would say that all ethical statements are inherently false, and I would say they're all inherently meaningless.
Wait,
Okay.
oh, my dude, I'm glad. Oh, someone who actually understands. One, my position, which is error theory. Two, I'm really curious because someone actually mentioned an error theory's question before, and I doubt they'd actually be able to answer it, funnily enough. But I'm going to ask you, interestingly, that that you mentioned that you're actually specifically, that you know about error theory, and you call yourself a monomotivist. That's super interesting to me. How do you solve the embedding problem? So for anyone in chat who doesn't understand what the question I'm asking is that there is a big, so the difference between what would say mine and Spacebeard's position would be is that I've come on here before and called myself an error theorist, right? And what that means is exactly what Spacebeard said, is that there's no, like, if you ask a moral question, you can be wrong, but there's no like true or false, that you're in, that there's an error, right? And the difference between mine and Nick's position, as you mentioned before, is that instead of saying that like murder is wrong, right, being like a true or false statement, his position would be murder is bleh, right? Like murder is yuck. I don't like murder, right? Now there's a big problem with this position that has been like kicked around in philosophy for a couple of years, and it's called the embedding problem, right? And the embedding problem would state that whenever you make this statement, it works, right, on its own, like murder is yuck, right? Murder is, but as soon as you write it out, you write like murder is bad, right? And you say the next sentence you say is something like Nick did murder Nick did a murder and was wrong to murder, or something like that, right? It carries that moral weight, and that non-cognitivists, people who think there isn't a truth element to morality, can't answer why that actually has like moral weight in that sentence now.
Okay.
Well, I see the way I deal with it is simply like, so I think it's an axiomatic problem, right? So you would say that this problem returns a false value, and I would say it returns a null value, which is neither true nor false, right? And the issue here is that when somebody says the word good or bad, I don't think that it carries moral weight. What I think that it is actually just someone making small mouth noises and projecting meaning onto them that's not there, right? So like, for example, when I say that's bad, I'm not actually making a statement about that. I'm simply making a statement about my internal emotional state, and I'm psychologically projecting onto this my feelings, and I'm sort of grammatically forming that as a property of the thing. And I don't think I can make all kinds of nonsensical mouth noises, but just because I form them as one thing, just because I form something as a proposition, doesn't make it inherently a proposition. And you know, to be honest with you, I'm a moral I consider myself to be a moral non-cognitivist because I've never been presented with you know, a significant reason to come over to error theory. But I mean, it's a significant backup, and it's a position that I actually respect. It's one of the only other ethical positions that I respect.
Yeah, so I'm just like, I would like to ask Kyosan actually a question, because Spacebeard couldn't have put my position in like a better phrase whatsoever. And I would just kind of ask, maybe this is my misunderstanding of error theory, but if maybe you believe that all moral propositions are false, meaning they have some sort of truth value, is it possible for moral propositions to be true as well, even though, as far as we can understand, all of them are false?
So we can't come to a true conclusion. So we don't have so like the reason why, and this is going to come back to, sorry, this is boring talk. Tell me if I'm like slowing chat down, or if anyone's interested in this kind of explainer. But basically, right, what's his name? There's two arguments for error theory, right? There's the argument from disagreement, which is why you can't come to an agreement on moral positions, right? And there's the argument from queerness that says that there is no, and this is the argument that someone else put before, which made me really interested. It's why I joined the chat, because I was like, holy shit, this is actually like really interesting questions. Was basically that if I am to steal something, right, I'm going to try and put this in like the best kind of like way that a person who isn't familiar with the literature would say, right? So I'm in a digital Truman Show, right? And the producer of the digital Truman Show is watching overhead and has complete control of the simulation, right? And that simulation is our world, okay? And I, as a random person in this world, go and steal from the main character's house a fuck ton of jewels, right? Because I'm poor and I need cash. Now, the producer of the show sees
kind
this.
of jewels.
The producer of the show sees this, and he's got a storyline that involves those jewels, right? So what he does is he clicks a button and he replaces it. He puts the jewels back, right? Because he needs the jewels there for the storyline. Now, nothing of consequence has happened. Nothing there's no consequence here, right? Because if you say that like, oh, stealing is bad because it leaves the person without position, or you might get in trouble, or because you're going to argue from consequences, like we wouldn't want a world where they're stealing, for example, right? These are all examples of like deontological and utilitarian positions that might say like why stealing is wrong. Now, what the error theorist would say is there is nothing internal, motivation internal, right, to why stealing is wrong. And the fact that like someone asked before, like what was if you could steal something and there was no consequences, is it wrong, right? That's a really, really good question, because that's the question that error theorists have been asking for like 30 fucking years now, and that no one's come up with a decent answer for. Because it means that there's no motivations internal to morals themselves. And it has to be the case that there is a truth value to morals, because the Frege-Geische problem, aka the embedding problem that I mentioned before, demonstrates that moral statements embed, that they carry on through, like whether or not we think the initial premise is false or doesn't even have like a truth value at all, right? Doesn't matter, because every statement we make afterwards using that carries that moral weight.
Well,
what do you mean by moral?
the way
a failure of language?
I think generally the way that I deal with this, and maybe it's just my lack of understanding, is that that problem is based on an assumption that because someone utters something that it exists, and I don't think that's the case. I don't think that it has weight. I think that it is just a continuation of the same kind of psychological projection put into writing and then carried over. That invalidity carries over.
So let me ask you this. First off, in this instance, is why do people put psychic projections onto moral values? Like the instance here is, why do we agree to assign these moral claims, and why do we agree to these claims of morality? And
I would say that we don't.
What you would say that we don't project?
I mean, if we all agreed on what morality was, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
No. But you see, there's different types of morality.
Maybe I
right?
misunderstood you.
No, like what I'm saying is like there are different types of morality, and we all have different levels of psychic projection. Like for example, like we agree on general based concepts of like stealing is bad. Like you can say it's just mouth noises.
I don't agree.
Like
so wait,
no,
yeah, we
but like
wouldn't even
no,
agree
wait.
that stealing is
Like
that's the
like
problem.
as on a
Well,
societal level,
You're
right?
using it as an example.
So
On a
like
societal
taxes,
level,
everyone agrees that taxes are
Well,
good.
let's
Taxes are
let him finish.
definitionally stealing, right?
Let him finish, Woody.
So on a societal level, we agree generally that stealing is bad. Like on a general level, we can have different interpretations on different applications. We agree on a general level that stealing is bad. So in that instance, why do we agree to that? Why does society agree to that baseline level of
I can
stealing
answer
is
that.
bad?
Okay. So what you're doing, in my opinion, is you're confusing the power of the state with general agreement. And before, when I said might does make right, I don't mean that there is right and wrong. I mean that power is the only thing with a material reality in that circumstance. And so when the state says you will not steal or there will be consequences, I don't think that reflects a general social agreement about the nature of stealing. I think that just is a statement about the expected behavior of the state within the context of theft.
What about whenever like people live in an apartment and they
That is
both
a
live
generally
together?
applicable. You can apply that to anything.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
so if I could clarify that a
but
little bit
in
here.
instances whenever it's not affected by the state, it's a relationship between two people. Like
It
when
doesn't matter. It's about power in them between two different people. Who has so like when we say power, generally speaking, because we don't believe in like an objective sense of morality, meaning like at least for me in Space Fear, there are just no true value to this. This is no different than someone's opinion on the matter, although it's maybe a little bit more complicated depending on how much meta you want to engage in here. Generally speaking, it's just people's emotions on what they value. It's slightly more complicated than their favorite ice cream flavor, favorite movie, or something like that. There's no real truth value to the concept of strawberry ice cream is like the best ice cream ever. There's no real truth value to that. That's just your opinion. And so when we realize that ultimately morality, one, has no truth value and two, is subjective, or vice versa, we realize that power, the ability to make other people do what you want even if they don't want to do it, is all that truly matters. Because you can say all you want that eating green food is bad and people ought not eat green food. Doesn't really fucking matter if I force people to eat green food and I have enough power to make everybody eat green food. And if you resist, well, we'll just put you down.
So,
Yeah.
Sevatar. So, do your views align with Nick's here, Mr. Spacebeard?
Yeah, for the most part.
Okay, so now that helps me because I'm used to you at this point. So it helps me understand exactly
You
what
gotta be
this.
more quirky then.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay. All right. So I'm getting this now. Well, I'll go to Kyo, then KTN.
I'm going to ask like a really common critique. And this is going to be the one that's going to be shared by, if anyone here is familiar with a guy called Rem the Bath Boy, this is going to be the critique that he's going to ask anyone with a similar position. I have an answer to it. I'm just curious as to what you would say, right? So when we make statements about what we ought to do, right, these ought statements are really important. In philosophy, we call these oughts norms or normatives, right? Now, there are different kinds of norms, like categorical norms, like norms that encompass everything that are true in all senses, and norms that are hypothetical, that are true within a given scenario or goal, right? But we understand that these norms exist. Now, the funny thing is that the way that we apply these norms, these oughts, are going to be interesting in different scenarios. So if we think about it further, right, we don't just say you ought not steal, right? We say what ought to be true. We say, and these oughts about like what needs to be true are called epistemic norms, right? Norms about how we think about the world, right? What explains truth and what isn't, right? And there has been a very popular critique that we call the companions in guilt, right? And the companions in guilt argument goes like this, is that you have these moral norms and you have these epistemic norms, right? These are the same norms. These are all norms. And that if you don't have some kind of categorical that is true in all sense, epistemic norm to define what a true statement is, you can't make meaningful statements, right? So if you're going to say as a non-cognitivist that there is no such thing as a norm that is true, right? What you're going to run into the problem of is that you're also going to not be able to make meaningful statements. How would you respond to the companions in guilt critique?
Yeah, so I've engaged in this before with one person on a different server. Basically, how they did it is they did it in a slightly more, I guess, simpler take where they reject Hume's is-ought distinction. It's kind of the best way you can put it.
That is very cringe.
Yeah, I know it's very cringe, but it gets to the
I actually
well.
do reject that from both the spiritual and philosophical perspective.
Yeah,
I
but
don't
from
see
an
difference
epistemic
between
level.
these
So I understand like the point where like epistemic norms or quote unquote are ought statements. People ought view reality quote unquote in this particular way. When it comes to that, I debated it with one of my philosophy professors, and we kind of went over where it's like we believe for whatever reason, and I know that's not very helpful, that we do accept kind of a distinction between like epistemic oughts and moral oughts to a degree, although I'm not going to be able to articulate that right now. I think me and you can discuss that later on.
Let me ask the ultimate question here is, regardless of whether these whether we like socially construct moral values and whether or not it's objective, like I don't agree that it's objective, but the fact of like it being social, like constructions itself, why does it even fucking matter? The fact is we have to live in a society where these social constructs continue to affect us, and we have to determine how they're going to relate to us. We have to figure out how we interact with them, regardless if they're like fictional or like non-fictional or like engaging on some like meta level. Ultimately, we have to deal with them, so it doesn't.
What
matter.
I would, yeah.
That's what we
what
have.
I would argue
like
here is that
Yogo
like
and
this
Reality.
discussion about like we have like discussions like right now, like we're having a discussion, not right now, I'm going to rewind it, right? So even like right now actually, and even in a couple of like in several different places, right, we have like people in society arguing because they have some like book that they decide they want to pick passages from, that it is wrong to be gay, it is wrong to have people intermarry with people of a different race, that it is wrong to have that it's wrong for like people to be the gender that they are, right? To be born in the way that they are, right? These discussions are important because these kinds of people, these kinds of bad actors in society, are people we need to sort of rally against and have some understanding of why we do things. And we also apply ethics to every single different part of the life, right? Like how we apply like bioethics, right, is a really fucking big thing, right? What's the right thing to do in medicine? What's your doctor's right and what's how are they supposed to treat you, right? What do we have to do as a society? These kinds of things are very, very important. This is why these people who have these ethics degrees are actually usually employed and contracted by these kinds of departments, because these kinds of discussions are really fucking important, right? Might be like one of the most important discussions we have, because everything's going to downflow from what you think is good or bad, right? Your policy descriptions, right? What you think about the world, how you think we should be, right? What you find important. Like, these are some of the most important discussions we can be having.
So,
okay, but
hold on,
the problem...
one second. So, you jumped in front of KTN, who's going to go on.
Sorry.
And I want, though I do want Beard to be able to respond to what you were saying. Before we do that, though, and don't forget what you guys are going to say, I want to welcome the newer people who popped in. Sud Muffin, is it? Is that your name? All right. Okay. All right. Oh, hello. Didn't hear you, but hello. And someone else. Oh, Zin. Thanks, Zin, for being here.
I'm sorry. Thanks for having me.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much, Prime.
Sure. Thank you for
Hey, Prime, I think I'm going to hop off here.
Okay.
My brain is like too fried at this point, and I don't want to deal with like normative ethics at all right
okay.
now.
All right. Well,
This is
meta
ethics.
All right.
Yeah, this is meta ethics.
I wanted to
nice
say, Wordy, I wanted to say woo pig suey. WPS.
No, fuck Arkansas. I want to get out of here. I want to go away.
I know, but I went to that university. I went to that university for a while, and I got the fuck out. Now
Yeah,
I'm in
and it fucking
Colorado,
sucks here.
and it's
so.
much better.
Okay.
I know it sucks. I know, but it was neat to see the sports team from Fayetteville there do well.
Yeah. So the last question I want to leave with Nick is like, what fundamentally prevents Nazis from killing Jews? That's all I want.
Power.
Yeah, power.
Okay. See you later.
All right. KTN.
Yeah. So now,
Nothing kept them from killing Jews, apparently.
Well,
keep that in mind. They killed Jews until they felt like they should stop, and they stopped of their own volition when they couldn't keep up the war effort. So no morality stopped the Holocaust. It was power.
Yeah,
and the Rangers and Soviets coming in and. Like,
anyways, I don't want to cut off KTN because it was his turn to speak.
The Soviets decided win in the first place.
And well, there's a few interesting things about this conversation, because right now we're talking about power dynamics, which is basically, it's not a new concept, but it's a concept that only the average person has taken on in the past like 5-6 years. Before that, I think society has kind of been in a situation where everyone kind of agreed on how society works through necessity, because most people didn't want to. The reason we do good things is because we don't want to feel pain, we don't want to feel loss, we don't want to feel. I think people have agreed on those things over the years. Now,
can I respond to this?
Actually, I have one quick note after he's done.
Let me just finish.
Yeah, finish.
So, obviously, the reason why I think most people on the panel don't want to do bad things is because we don't want to inflict harm on people. We've agreed upon that societally, but different societies have agreed on it to different degrees. They've said this hurts people, that hurts people, that hurts people. And through that, we've got the state, because the state has been able to enforce those laws because people kind of had a consensus. But the other part of the state is the idea that, we have power. We gave them that power. And on top of it, we are having a problem right now with our updating, rebooting, what we consider to be new norms and new ways of hurting people. This guy was saying earlier, Kaizen, those people who go into that book, and they say that these things are wrong, they're, to them, the things that they say wrong are hurting them, like people choosing who they want to be, people marrying outside of their culture or race. Those are things that they consider to be detrimental to their perceived society. But for some of us who have decided to do updates and reboot what the norms should be, or what hurts society, we've said to ourselves that, well, it's been proven that dating outside your culture or race doesn't harm anyone in the long run. Norms, letting someone choose who they want to be in any time of their life doesn't hurt someone in the long run. But I think that's the problem. I think that one of the major problems is we have a problem with the reboot, with the updating of what these norms are. And I think that we should be allowed to update our norms constantly and update what we think society should be like. But once again, it's I kind of lost my train of thought over time. because I was waiting. But that was kind of down the line of what I was going. The idea that yes, we gave the power to these people through consensus, and we've made our judgment on what's good or bad, or what or yeah, it's hard to explain because I'm not much into philosophy, but like, the reason that some people have power is because the society just gave it to them collectively, whether we know it or not. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'll see.
So I'd
I
like
think it's
to
been
hold on,
taken.
if
I think it's been
I
Yeah, go ahead.
could,
Go ahead, Nick. Sure.
real quick. So now I have two things to respond to. One, be really quick. The original purpose of the state, I don't believe. So maybe we're in agreement on this. The original purpose of the state was to create an entity that had a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence, so that we could get rid of justice at the individual level. And I think that was expressed in the code of. Well, that was not that we don't want violence. It's that we don't want violence being.
No, you don't want mob.
It's more efficient.
You don't want mob.
Sure. I think the original, and I think Hammurabi's code is generally considered to be the first instance of the state taking control and assuming the monopoly on violence, whereas before it was handled at an individual level. Okay, but to respond to the prior point, the person that left, I think I took a note on this one. I think the reason why people feel the need to engage in this kind of moral language is that some people have a need to justify their willingness to violence in some other way than aesthetic. Because ultimately, all your moral beliefs are an expression of your personal aesthetic. And we as human beings have a tendency towards a willingness to violence over what we find beautiful and not beautiful. And many people have trouble justifying that to themselves, and so have to attach it to something outside of themselves, like a property of an object or some kind of moral truth or a god or what have you. But in reality, we as humans tend to express ourselves violently over things as simply as what we find aesthetically pleasing or displeasing.
I think
Yeah, so I just need to respond here for a couple of things. I'm not Space Period. Maybe this is where we kind of diverge, but I completely disagree with what KTN said. Like almost everything he said. Generally speaking, humanity has not agreed on like their morals or anything. Even
No, I
within
agree
our
with
own-
that 100%. I don't agree with what he said. I was just commenting on the
fine.
origin and nature of
Like
the
for
state.
the United States, modern day, we are in technically speaking the most peaceful time in all of human history. But even now, as we can all definitely see, there's a ton of violence, there's a ton of oppression, there's a ton of pain and suffering.
Certainly more organized.
Believe it, yeah, it's certainly more organized, and there's like still more death. But generally speaking, it's more peaceful overall in terms of states not killing each other on that. But during the past, if you can believe it or not, things were a lot more violent. Even in the United States, people just slaughtered each other en masse for their religious disagreements.
Well, we mean physical violence.
We
Sure, like
with physical violence or literal just killing each other en masse. Even before the Civil War, we had like Bleeding Kansas, for example, where different groups of people fought over whether or not this certain state should be a slave state or a free state, quite literally slaughtering each other en masse. So no, we've never agreed.
We have people beating the shit out of each other in Congress. Like
yeah,
in
we have
Congress.
people beating the shit out of Congress, so on and so forth. Like people have never
so need
agreed
that.
on what are the like overall morals of a society. That's just like something that's not true.
I understand that people have never agreed, but I think that I think that when it comes to violence, I think everyone's capable of violence. I think the average person is capable of violence, but like you said, okay, we're in our least violent time, but right now people are very docile, and things like, all right, I'll give you an example. I drive a truck around New York City, and if you know how many arguments I get into on a weekly basis, you would say that, like, why? What's stopping me from just beating up everyone?
There's a gun pointed at your head 24/7, my dude. That's why people are docile now. They're not docile because something changed. They're docile because the reach of the state has become so pervasive and so like
the state?
un
So
unsurpassable that the violence
Nick,
has
wait,
become.
wait a second, Nick.
What does that
no,
mean?
wait, Nick. To be fair, you mentioned before that you actually have like a separate normative judgment from your meta-ethical judgment. So you mentioned before. So just for people in the chat who don't know those nerdy fucking words, right? What Nick's describing when he calls himself like an emotivist is like, what do I think that good is? And Nick explained before that when he makes decisions about like his judgments, right? Like why don't you steal? Why don't you just kill people in the street if there is no good or bad, right? Nick said, well, I make some utilitarian judgment about that, right? So like the norms that he's made are like separate from the meta ethics that he's made. Yeah, debate more or less, right? But like, so we can take like, I think like people might be conflating here Nick's position about like descriptive things, like why don't you do things, right? Which is power. That's the truth, right? The main reason why people don't do things as much as they don't want to admit it is because they'd get in trouble if they did, right? And prescriptive, right? When Nick would say, well, I wouldn't do these things because I think that like we live in a society, and in order to come to some decision about what the best society might be, we want to probably use a utilitarian calculus since we're using consequences to usually make out moral judgments anyway. Would that be a fair assessment of your position?
Wait, I don't know if it's that deep, but maybe.
Can I get back to my example quickly?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Because New York City, like I said, New York City, millions of people. Now, a place this big with so many people tightly knit, packed in together, there's only 44,000 police officers. If we wanted to overrun the city, we could overrun the city in a few minutes. If we wanted to commit random acts of violence with each other, with our neighbors, we could do that every single day. The police don't have the capacity or the manpower.
Not just the police, though.
Okay, police and who well, I mean, you know, the
United States military, the fact that people are cowards, and there doesn't have to be a credible.
If I may. So like, violence isn't the only form of power. Like that, violence is not the only thing that power takes. Power can take many different forms. Again, like the general definition I use is like the international relations definition. You make other people do what you want, even if they don't want to do it. That is the definition I use because
that's always back by violence, though.
Let me finish. But what I'm saying is, yes, you can call the National Guard, whatever. But the thing about violence is everyone forgets that, like, yeah, you can commit acts of violence and get away with them. Because at the end of the day, yeah, the police don't get there. Police aren't in the middle of every single violent act. If all of a sudden New York City decided to break into one quick violent act, it would take years for them to prosecute all the cases. Capitol riots, it's going to take them like a year or two to prosecute all those cases. It's, you know, the police are only there to come and clean up the mess half the time. You know, unless they decide to just ford up and then just get behind their station and then, you know, but that's another hypothetical.
That's
but
like Division 2 level.
But you'd have to organize more power and get good luck organizing
that. That just means you have more power. So of course, like if you have millions of people versus 40,000, like random people or 40,000 cops, yeah, the millions of people are going to win. Like that's just kind of facts. But hypothetically speaking, we want to go down this insane route. Me dropping 3 nukes on New York City in a video game called Civ 6 or whatever. Doesn't matter how many millions you got there, buddy. My 3 nukes are gonna trump that real quick.
You could drop 1 nuke in Manhattan and wipe out most of New York State, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey.
Yeah, three is just to turn the entire place into.
But the point is that doesn't matter. That's a 44,000 man standing army versus like just a bunch of random actors.
Wait, but what the city even still like? Yeah, like they can nuke it, but like the U.S. military isn't gonna nuke New York City.
Yeah, but 30,000 people are not going to rise against the United States.
Philadelphia. You know,
also, the point is that the point is also it doesn't matter whether or not they can. It matters whether or not people believe that they can, or whether it's worth their life to oppose it. And the fact is that violence now pervades every aspect of society through, you know, private property law, through that's actually the most obvious example would be private property law. I mean, it's everywhere. It controls everything, and it is the primary function of the police.
The perceived power of the state and the violence of the state, but also I think that people sometimes at some point stop the action of violent act because they don't even want to. They don't want to commit harm themselves. I know people who are, you know, bullies who fight, and then eventually they get to a certain age where they're like, I'm sick of doing this. I'm sick of violence.
Sure, because like,
you know,
do you think that's entirely them, or do you believe that's like the society pushing on?
No, I think when people see enough violence, they stop. When people see enough,
I don't know if you have like or whatever.
So finish your point. So finish your point. I want to let some other people in. So finish your point, KT, and then let some other people in.
Yeah. Well, basically, I basically think that that a lot of times people aren't docile just because of the state. They're docile because they don't want to. Violence is one of those things that you can have enough of it, the blood, but once the thirst for violence is over, eventually people don't want violence; they want peace.
Also, a lot of people are cowards.
So go ahead, Paul, then Marks. Did you want to go Salty, or is it what was his name again? I have the pink hat.
Rocky.
Sorry, Rocky. Did you want to go?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I'll go to Paul, Marks, and you. Okay.
I think what KTN said is very true, because I used to live in a really, really rough neighborhood. And once you see enough people get shot, you're kind of sick of seeing that after a while. And it's like, even people that were in gangs and shit, they would have a family member get killed or something and be like, fuck this, I'm out.
People in the military, I know people in the military that
Yeah,
are
my grandfather was in Vietnam, and he
they don't want
hates
to
that shit.
Okay.
Once you see enough shit, you're tired of shit. It's
and
basic
that's why
logic.
that's why we have a society that's cohesive, because I think
And it also has to do with repetition.
Sometimes.
I mean, you asked a bunch.
I thought we were letting them finish, which is why I'm not like.
Yeah. I'm just making sure. Paul, are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. You can respond to that, and then after that, we'll go to Marks.
Who's responding?
I don't know if anyone wants to respond.
Yeah, sure. You guys are just bringing up anecdotes when we could just look at case studies and or data and just prove that this is just not true. We can look at multiple societies throughout the entire world and throughout human history that will literally go to war with each other for over 100 years of constant fighting. The Sengoku era of Japan is a good example of this, where like it's a couple 100 years, I'm pretty sure, or maybe I'm just wrong about that, of Japan just being in a constant civil war with various daimyo and samurai slaughtering each other en masse, with ashigaru peasants killing each other, or the 100
There
years
also
war
was a
between-
100-year-old samurai.
Well, okay, that's not true. Then we have like the
No, there were no samurai that were 100 years
war.
old.
Yo, let's just accept that this is not a universal human truth. Some people get tired of violence. Some people don't get tired of violence.
But this idea that like people, sure, some people get tired of violence, but the
You
overwhelming
really think the same people who were at the beginning of the war fought at the end of that?
Paul, let me finish.
Like the overwhelming evidence clearly supports this idea that while your anecdotes are true, that some people or a good number of people get tired of violence, human beings in general will always find reasons to slaughter each other for quite literally centuries. So no, this is just not
I
true.
agree with that. That is
So I don't
true.
know about like find reasons to slaughter each other. I would argue that like what's going on here is people want to improve their material conditions, that they see violence as some way to achieve that, and that in this instance, they see that violence is fine. They tend to justify.
Especially back
I'm
then,
agreeing,
it
but
would
they
be the
tend to.
easiest solution.
I mean,
there
But they tend to,
there were
that's
no
why as
planes,
global
there was
trade
no
has
way to
gotten
move.
stronger, you see like less violence, right? Because you're able to improve material conditions.
So
You don't see
Yeah,
less
more
violence.
interdependence means like violence will slowly but surely.
Just see more systematic violence rather than disorganized.
So I want to go to Marks, then Rocky, then KTN.
Yeah,
Wait,
so I
Prime,
arrived a little.
I'm gonna head out.
Okay, thank you for being here, Paul.
Thank you, Prime. This is very fun. Hopefully, I'll be back again. Thank you, everyone, for
Please.
hearing my bullshit.
All right, great.
Have a good night.
You too. Marks.
Alright. Yeah, I was gonna say. So I arrived a little late, so sorry if I keep sort of echo what a bunch of people already said. But generally, throughout human history, people have committed. Massive amounts of people have committed acts of violence for various reasons: patriotism, nationalism, ideological battles, conditions. I think what's most relevant in our era, at least in the America, I don't think that anybody, at least any time soon, is going to like start a civil war over like patriotism. At least I don't think. If anything, I think it'll ultimately come down to conditions in like most modern Western countries, which is why I think like there's almost a certainty that there's never going to be like a revolution in Western countries. Just our conditions are way too good. Even if you live in like a ghetto in like America, your conditions are way too good to like want to overthrow the U.S. government or some shit like that, or the UK government. Like, but yeah.
Go ahead.
Since there's
no, Rocky, please go ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah, for sure. So I think one of the I'm gonna be hopping off here after a sec, but essentially one thing that I think we're leaving out here too is backlash from generally the society around you. You know, one thing, especially with gang members, is the Chirac War was essentially started because they killed a 14-year-old kid, and then it kind of went back and forth. Now, this has continued, and this kind of goes to the point where, of course, this violence, it hasn't necessarily deterred the entirety of the gang. It's caused a lot of these gang wars. However, now there is a lot of, between the gangs, they obviously still have their beefs, etc. But at least in public, they're trying to, somewhat tamper it down, because these people, they have to live, if you live in the gang life, or if you live around violence constantly, you're constantly going to be having to look over your shoulder, see who's going to be coming for you, not just cops or etc. You're going to have to worry about the civilians next to you. So I agree that it has a lot to do with power, but also we have to look at the backlash of the civilians around you and what you do to them and how that will make them react. Because generally, when you synergize with your society, it will further your self-interest, and then also, furthering other people's self-interest will further yours, because they will, return, generally speaking. But anyway, so yeah, that's my point.
Okay, Tian, did you want to respond?
Yeah, so
to that, or does Servitor want to respond to that? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's just I think we're all missing points. So, Marks, when someone brought up the idea of like all of New York rebelling at once, it was just an example of something. And when they're just not understanding what me and Space Beard and Gilson are talking about. I already said, I'm not going to repeat myself, sorry. How do I phrase this? Yeah, power is generally, as I defined it, means that violence is not the only way to achieve your goals. Money is another thing. You can bribe people, you can convince people. There are a bunch of different ways you can go about using power or taking power into its various forms. So I don't know why you guys are just focusing solely on this idea that power is just some sort of like violence, or at least the state in general. It just so happens that, as far as we can understand currently, the state is the most efficient way of using and obtaining power, as far as we can
Because
understand.
all power is going to be derivative of the monopoly of violence.
Well, sure, it's ultimately going to be going back to violence. I agree with that.
That's
for
generally
the
why,
most
right?
part. For the most part.
Let's go to.
What do you mean could you give me an example where it's not?
Where it goes, like he was just talking about, the
but money,
general society aside from the state. That's a form of power. That is not the state and doesn't go back to the state.
What do you mean by society apart from the state?
People in general.
Yeah, but
as in like some collective. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter how
Backlash from your neighbors is not backlash from the state. Backlash
Yeah,
from
but
the state would be
you guys are talking past each other. So like Kyosan is just saying that at the end of the day, power is just the ability to use violence. Doesn't matter how much money you have. Doesn't matter like how many people you got supporting you. If they're all going to be a bunch of pacifists, or I'm just not going to accept their money.
I don't disagree with
I'm going to bludgeon as many people as I have
I'd say,
to.
it depends on what aspects you mean of like by power. If you mean like,
I just don't think the
Power
state
is
has
the
a
ability
monopoly on violence.
like again, Kyosan and I like define power already. I define power in the most general sense of it's the ability to make other people do what you want, even if they don't want to do it. And then Kyosan just furthered that by saying that at the end of the day, it's about violence, because ultimately all general
Even if
forms
they
of power
So
go back to violence.
I want to.
No,
before,
honestly,
before we missed it, KTN has been waiting, and then we'll go to Marks.
I still want to kind of push back on Sevatar with about anecdotal evidence about people not having taste for violence anymore after a long time. If you look at, I know plenty of U.S. soldiers who came back from our forever wars who have absolutely no taste for violence, with PTSD, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not talking about like only a few of them. There's a large group of them. I would say more than 60% of them. Then I would talk about people who are in the jail population, who have been to prison, and they've seen plenty of violence. They come back after a couple of years, and they're like, I want no violence. They don't want it at all. I would look at the populations from Vietnam, those guys who came back, and then we had society backlash against it. The majority, the reason we left the war was because the people didn't like it, the soldiers didn't like it. So and I would say that was more than 50%, more than 60%. And then I would say, yes, the examples you said about French society, yeah, that was back in the day, obviously. And then also on top of it, yes, violence. We do have wars that go on forever and ever, but also those wars are being perpetuated by a new generation of people that have been either indoctrinated in the old rhetoric. But if you poll the older people that were there before, they will say, yes, these young guys are doing the thing that we did, and we don't want to do the thing that these young guys are
Yeah, but
doing.
we're talking about from a societal perspective and humanity perspective.
Even wait, So to be clear,
anecdote.
even from a societal perspective, right? Obviously, like nobody wants violence. It's anything that we do, we have like some cost benefit analysis for, right? And if people see that that violence is like worthy of the cost, then they'll do it, right? Like people, like you talk to like Marxists, right? And they'll be understand they don't want violence, they don't want to do any like violent revolution. What they'll tell you is like this revolution is like worth the cost, right? Like if you ask anyone in like American foreign policy, or they'll tell you that, like they don't want to obviously send people off to go and die. They think that the cost is worth it, right? If you ask any of those soldiers on the ground, they'll tell you that like they'll tell you like a similar thing. Like part of the reason why like American patriotism, like like they don't want to obviously go to war. Nobody wants to go to fucking war. Nobody wants to put their life at risk, right? But having the alternative is usually what's going to drive them to go and do it. It's like going to work. Like you don't want to go to work. Nobody wants to go do work, right? But we understand there's like a benefit to going and doing it.
Bullshit.
Well,
Whether I'm willing to die for my country or not, it's not like.
Yeah, I was.
Hey, come on now, you're making it too soft.
Yeah, I was also going to say that
you're
the
not
powers.
you're not taking into account the fact that it's not that people just don't want to go to war. They don't want to do violence. They don't want to do violence for themselves, and they don't all want to go to war for themselves. But they still support systems of institutional violence, and they don't get tired of it. And to respond to this, to what KTN is saying, yeah, I mean your sample group is largely returned veterans, right? But the guys that didn't get tired are still there, right? There's guys that are still there that didn't get tired of it. A lot of them are still there, right? So it's like I think your sample group's a little bit skewed, and I don't necessarily disagree with the prior point that all power ultimately comes back to violence, because I think all power does ultimately come back to violence. I just don't think that the state has a true monopoly on that violence, and that there are other vectors of violence involved besides just the state. But primarily, it is the state.
Yeah, so going by your definition of making people do what they do what you want, even if they don't want to. If they don't want to do it, I don't think it all fundamentally goes back to violence. For example, if you want to get like more communal, I know for Native American societies where you would have men or women that you would task them to do something or ask them to do something, like let's say go fishing or get berries, whatever the fuck, right? They would never like kick you out of the tribe or kill you for doing that. At least in some tribes, it would just go back to socially, like the people in the tribe would like look down on you if you didn't complete this task. Like there was no like threat of like violence within some of
well, societies don't require power. Again,
Yes, they do. Firstly, but secondly,
not all societies require power.
It's a cost benefit analysis there. I can get someone to do something by threatening them with severe harm. That's something I can do. Or there's a probably more efficient way of, hey, I'm going to dangle some shiny coins in front of your face. Do this, and then they will do it.
No, but you said before that from my understanding, you said before that powers are fundamentally goes back to violence.
Yes, ultimately will come back to violence, because again, if they don't care about the shiny coins, if they don't care about my pretty words, if they don't care about social shunning, if they don't care about all this non-violent stuff, and I still need them to do this thing, then ultimately I'm going to have to threaten them to do this thing or harm them to do this thing.
Also, that can be
covert.
Okay, wait, I'll give you an example.
If you
Wait,
need it, or
this
you can get a replace. Okay.
This is an address to me, right? So the understanding is that if you live in like I don't know, like village, right, and you don't want to, or community, and you don't want that to be to hand to you, right, is that there's like very roundabout. This guy's have very roundabout answer, right? But say you're like in that village and you don't want to lose that social capital, right? That losing enough of that social capital can come at a significant cost to you, which would bounce out of being violent, right? Because I would consider like forcing someone to like starve out or not having resources, right? I would consider that kind of inaction as well to be violent, right?
I agree.
Yeah, and so these denial of resources.
I think we need to be careful not to synonymize society with civilization and culture with civilization. I would agree that civilization requires systems of power, but if you take, for instance, a society based upon a gift economy, it's not necessarily going to be based upon power, but it's going to be based upon intrinsic motivation, based upon a psychological sense of indebtedness, based upon a network of gifts. And I know this is
who's a part of that economy and who's not is still going to be like instituted by power. This social capital actually becomes like incredibly more powerful under those societies than capital, right? Now,
power is make people.
Yeah, but make in this sense was just like, it's not as in force. It's just like they are motivation could be a thing that makes people.
If you define power by motivate people to do what they don't
power,
want to do,
then power is meant to make people do it. Well, make is just like as the verb is just to get them to do.
Then we have no disagreement.
Yeah, but going back to what Mark says, like, yes, there are alternatives, which is again a more efficient use of it. But when we say like again, that is just because you have other people to do it. You've convinced other people to do power. That's why I made power so vague, and like why Kyosan, like generally speaking, agrees with me with here, and I agree with him because maybe a different example would be a lot better to get my point across here. If there's someone who wants to murder you, Marks, and like you can't convince them to like not want to murder you and stuff like that, ultimately you are going to have to commit violence on that person or just
Right.
accept being murdered. There's no amount of
Yeah.
shiny toys or pretty words you can say to this person to get them to not want to murder you.
Sure, but that doesn't prove the point because you again, my understanding is that power fundamentally is backed up by violence. Like you can't separate the two, and I disagree with that factor. Going back to the village example. Now, yes, if that specific person in this village, I guess, loses the social capital, if he wants to gain the social capital back, he could use it through violence again. But again, in the hypothetical, he could try being more, I guess, I don't know, fucking charismatic, make more speeches. I don't think it all fundamentally goes back to violence. Maybe
Well, I mean,
now, if you want to talk about the state, I would absolutely agree. Yes, it goes back to ultimately violence. But if you're going to get like more communable about like the absolute abstract of power, I would not say that in all aspects it's backed by violence. No.
Well, Mark,
So what
Or
happens
that
if you
it
lose?
has to, that it
What
has
happens
to
if you
go
lose?
back to violence.
What happens if you lose all social capital in that instance?
Right,
You can
exactly.
gain it back. You can gain it back socially. Now
What
you
happens
could
if
say
you
that
lose all
that
social
could be.
capital in that instance?
Well,
No,
you can
gain.
starve,
Wait,
and I think that's a.
You
I
can
think
gain
that's
it back,
actually
but
a
that
form
doesn't
of
answer my
violence.
question.
Yeah.
what
So
happened?
you can
Wait,
get it
what
back, but that doesn't answer my
Marks.
question. What happens if you lose all social capital in that instance?
Marks.
You can starve.
in the
And that, I think, is
village
violence.
example?
Sorry. Let Marks respond because this starts towards him, and then you can go
Wait,
afterwards.
yeah, in the village example, it depends what you want to talk about. They could kick you out of the village. You could be shunned.
How are they going to
What do
kick
you
me
mean?
out? How are they going to kick me out if I say so? Like I have my little teepee hut, and I'm the guy who's supposed to get fish. I decide, you know what? Fuck it. I'm not getting fish anymore. I'm only getting enough fish for myself. The rest of you fuckers can starve. And I'm going to stay at my teepee hut for the rest of the day. So they start shunning me. I don't give a shit. I'm still in the tribe. I'm still going to follow them around. I'm still going to take some resources whenever I want. So now what's going to happen to me?
Not all societies
Yeah,
based
no,
are based upon like specialization of labor, and again, like he was saying, there is a form of violence, right? I think there's an argument that can be made that even in gift economies where it's based upon people's willing participation based upon a psychological sense of indebtedness, if nobody has that psychological sense of indebtedness to you and they just don't help you anymore, humans are not individuals, and humans without other humans will die, and I think that could be a form of violence. Sure.
David Graeber had a book about bullshit jobs, and
Can Mark respond?
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
I was gonna say, what was your example again, Savitar? If he keeps taking
Yeah, so
the resources,
you brought out like they'll kick him out. That seems like a
Yeah.
form of violence. Or if you
it is a
start
form of
bringing up-
violence.
Okay,
And
so
they
then
could also
like,
shun
you
them.
agree with me.
Wait,
Okay, you're
no,
shunning me.
I never disagreed. You guys said fundamentally it always goes back to violence. That's the part I disagreed. I never said that to have power, that in a lot of cases, or like I don't know, most in modern society, you need violence. But I believe your prescription was that power always fundamentally
Not
goes back to
prescription, it's a
violence.
description.
Yeah, my fault. But always fundamentally goes back to how much violence you can ensue. And I would say no, I disagree with that.
So so what we said before was actually that if you go down far enough, it's going to end up being violence, right? There's going to be like some like monopoly of power that underlies the power that we talk about, and that monopoly on force is what we just described, right? That like by running that down, we understand that like there is some underlying monopoly on force that goes behind that power, right? And that's implicit. It's the what's the word from in the wise words of Dennett? It's about the implication, right?
Well, there was not always a
Wait.
monopoly on force. So, I mean, you can see that by the first institutions of the state that came about because there was no monopoly on force.
So,
Yeah, where we had a
hold
bunch
on.
of feudal lords slaughtering each other en masse because one fucked each other's sister, dude.
Marks, finish
Yeah,
up.
it's not a prescription, man. I'm just talking about
Yeah,
history.
no, I'm making a joke. I'm making a joke. It's not a jab at you. I'm sorry.
Marks and KTN.
Well, okay, so maybe you need to extrapolate that down further for me. So going back to the village example where you said that guy keeps like draining on the resources, again, shunning, or just not, or you can allow them, at least in some societies, to keep draining on the resources. You can just like not like them. If your society can afford it, maybe you can extrapolate it down further for me.
Go ahead, KTN.
Yeah, there's plenty of societies that do different things. I was reading about David Graeber had a book about bullshit jobs, and he went through a lot of smaller societies that if someone didn't pull their weight and was still like kind of a drain on society, they would try their best to be as accommodating to the person, and eventually, yes, it did devolve into into what's it called into violence. They threw him in the river. It's the same exact example. Fishing village. Eventually, the guy got too fat and he wasn't pulling his weight, and they just pulled together, threw him in the river. There's other societies where the men, because they want to cooperate going out for hunts. If one or two men are better than the others at hunting, they'll all share the meat because one group did better than the other group, but they want to come back eventually to distribute the meat so that they all get women and they all get favor. Yes, and there are societies that will go the opposite route, and they will affirm you if they feel like you are a detriment to society. They'll come around you, and then they'll start to talk about how good of a person you are. There's all these different ways of dealing with it. But the thing about the smaller societies, eventually those things didn't work. So yes, those people had to get together and build state entities, and my thing is it as a state entity actually that bad? Because not having the monopoly of force, I think there's a bit more chaos than most people are willing to admit.
Well,
So
let's look at
maybe I
our
can
let's look
draw
at
a
our
bridge here.
society now. One quick comment. Another example of a society is a society like ours, where the useless eaters aren't shunned, but they sit at the top and are maintained by bullshit jobs.
So maybe I can like make a bridge here, right? So if you're talking about in a lot of instances, in order to keep your power, you're going to have to use violence. For example, village example, some guy is like saying, "Fuck you, I don't like you as leader. I'm going to kill you for it." In that instance, yes, you're going to have to use violence in order to sustain your power. But I would argue that not in all ways does your power get threatened by violence. Like I said, again, social capital. People could just simply lose trust in you and say, "Hey, we don't want you as your leader anymore." Now, to gain back power in that instance, you don't have to use violence. You could, like I said, make charismatic speeches, whatever the fuck, and try to gain your social capital back. But
yeah,
any disagreements there? Any
Yeah, but
disagreements there?
speech, you're
Whatever.
just persuading people in order to get them to do what you want. Like
Yes,
Kyosan,
that's what I was going to say. Yes.
yeah. So again, it falls into my definition of power. But when Kyosan says it ultimately falls back to like violence and stuff like that, we're just going into a lot deeper understanding of ultimately speaking. If none of this shit works, if nobody values any of the things that you're saying or you're giving them or whatever, then yeah, I'm going to have to like start cracking some skulls in order to get what I want.
Yeah. Ultimately,
Wait
my
a
take,
second.
I
Hold
think
on.
that's undeniable. So at the bottom of everything, individual power is the basis for everything. Like, there's nothing below that. It's
What do you do if
Wait,
somebody in your society has Down syndrome?
You
You just
keep
let
them
them die? Do
happy.
you
You
kill
keep
them?
them happy because people, generally speaking, love their family members. You try to give them the best life possible. I don't understand. Like,
Just to be clear here, wait, there might be like, because I don't know if they were just here, but you might be missing the fact that we're actually talking about descriptive things. This isn't a prescription. This isn't about like what we ought to do with these people, right? Like every single person here is going to agree that like we necessarily give like the people in society who aren't necessarily able to enact their own sort of power or stuff that they have, like we should give them better lives because it like makes everyone around them happier, and that person's like preferences aren't invalidated by their condition, right? What we're describing here is what actually goes on in society, what's behind everything, what's true and false. Like how do we actually go about like governance and power, and how do they relate to everyone in our everyday lives?
But even then, to extrapolate it down further, going to that fundamental level, some people could just, like you said, not care about your speeches, not care about social capital at all, just want the power. Some people could not even care about violence in general, right?
yeah, and you kill them, and then nothing happens. Then
Wait,
right?
yeah, then you
They're
just
gone.
don't gain power.
No, you gain power. They're dead, and so now they're not a nuisance to you. You
Wait,
take whatever.
yeah, and then okay, hypothetically, yeah, the whole village saying, "I don't care about your violence. I'm not serving you." Yeah, I disagree.
Yeah, then
Kill them
they
all,
get killed
then
by
you
the
gain
one that
no
wants
power.
power, and then you have
A,
power.
kill them all, or B, you like again, if they just don't care about being tortured or put into fear, stuff like that, then yeah, you just take their shit and you leave, and or you kill them all in order
Yeah,
to
but
get.
that's not power. Then that's
It
not
is
power.
power.
Wait, no. Okay, by your definition, power making somebody do something even if they don't want to do it. If you just kill them all, that's not making them do it. They're
But if
dead.
you're
That's not
alone,
power.
your will is the only power exists, and it's the power over your own actions, and there's nobody opposing you.
Wait. Your definition
You can exercise
involves
power over yourself
somebody
too.
else.
No, it didn't say power over.
I thought we all agreed. Okay, maybe I'm mistaken. I thought we all agreed on
Violence and
Sevatar's
power are two
definition.
different things.
I know that. I'm going by Sevatar's definition, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sevatar.
Yeah,
Your
I think
definition.
I think Space Beard disagrees with me here.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
So what I'm saying is, like, if you come to a village, right, and you say, I will control all of you. And if they disagree and you're willing to kill them all, it comes down to violence.
Yeah.
If they choose not to oppose you and allow you to kill them, you have exercised power to its ultimate extent, and you are now alone. They are all dead, and the only one that has any power at all is you over yourself. That's it.
Okay, Nick, then we just disagree on the definition.
It just doesn't
of power.
fucking it doesn't matter. I mean, at that point, it doesn't matter. It's at that point, it's just a semantical, useless debate about nothing.
Yeah,
Like,
we
there's nobody else.
we disagree about power, Nick. Then okay, never mind.
Sure. I mean, that's fine. But I mean, if people aren't willing to exercise their power unto their own death, then you have.
Also, this might just be my argument from ignorance here or personal incredulity. I doubt there's like a society of people where every single person in it would be unwilling to do X, Y, or Z if I skin enough people to do something.
No, actually, Japanese. No, you could go back. I'm pretty sure there's a bunch more examples, but like Japanese soda's example, like dying, like surrendering his weakness. You're gonna have to kill me for that. So like, if you get like a bunch of if you want to enslave like Japanese soldiers, and they're like, no, fuck you, no matter what, I'm not gonna do what you want. You're gonna kill me.
They're gonna fight back.
I'm sorry, you're just wrong though with that example.
If their power fails,
soldiers, like so plenty of Japanese soldiers surrendered. Not only that,
wait.
Not
I
only
never
that,
disagree.
wait.
Okay.
So you're talking about in groups? Yeah, sure. There are groups of people who be willing to die before surrendering, death before dishonor, and stuff like that. I'm not denying that these people exist. We're talking about societies in general, and so like Japan as a society clearly did not agree with that.
Oh yes, they
Maybe,
surrendered.
like small soldier cults. Sure, like the Templars or something like that. There could be like small soldier cults that might do that to an extent. Although again, the United States soldiers didn't implement the methods that maybe some other more cruel people may implement to convince people to do X, Y, or Z. I'm pretty sure if you give like some sadistic people enough time, they could break even the most hardened of Japanese soldiers. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, if you're gonna go to a societal level, then
all
yeah,
this is
despite
ultimately saying-
number,
This entire argument is about societal levels.
Wait, we were extrapolating it down further to like more communal levels. But
But all
okay,
this-
like societal levels, yeah, sure. Just by numbers game, yes.
Yeah, so wait,
somebody's gonna surrender, but I could make the same thing about speeches, right? Just by numbers game, somebody's gonna agree with like my speech or like
Well, it's not about that, it's about-
abide by my social capital.
You want to say something, Rocky?
Talking past each other.
Yeah, I'm going to be right after this. I'm definitely hopping off now. But all I was going to say is we can see this to a lesser degree in in the United States criminal justice system, because when a judge is generally setting precedent on something, they'll do their best to throw the book at them as in order to deter people from further doing that crime. Now, that's one of the biggest debates within the criminal justice system is deterrence versus, rehabilitation and why people actually do it. But that's, one little example that I might be able to give, here in the US. But anyway, guys, I'm hopping off.
Have a good one.
Good
Thank
night,
you
guys.
for coming.
Yeah,
Have a good day.
maybe Killsman can like put this in different words. 'Cause I'm trying my best to.
No, it's not like I'm not sorry. I'm not trying to be like aggressive. We're just having a
No,
conversation.
nobody's aggressive here. Nobody's aggressive here. It's just
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I sound irritated or whatever. I'm playing Mordheim and my Skaven are all dying. But that's a different thing.
Kyosan?
I think what this says is it says something about the nature of power that power, right, that is unyielding when it meets power that's unyielding eventually annihilates itself. I mean, you can boil it down. Okay, so you got these people willing to kill until the absolute end. You got these people willing to kill until the absolute end. Whether or not eventually somebody's going to kill the other one, and then at that point, if you use that definition of power, sure, it's meaningless. But at that point, who gives a rat's ass? The end of power is the end of power.
Again, I'll extend it all range. Maybe I don't agree with you fundamentally, but if we're talking like modern society having to extrapolate it, then yeah, I will agree with you. In like most cases, you're going to have to use there's in order to maintain power or exert power, there is going to have to be a fundamental acceptance that this person can enact violence. I will agree with you in modern terms. Yeah.
Well, I think that actually raises an interesting point. Is power even if you don't exercise it? And I think it's still power. If you have the ability to use power, but you don't use it, right? Sure, but that doesn't mean that ultimately behind that, the foundation of that power is not violence, right? So it's like yeah,
I
I
mentioned
can.
before, I think that Dennis quote is like unironically like a real indicator of what's going on here, right? It's the implication.
Oh no.
Sure, yeah. I mean, so it's like.
So what's the question? Is the implication of violence still violence? With a
I think the implication of violence is
answer might make it will very much still be violence. Like it might make the right, according to Thrasymachus. I think
Well,
that would be a plus.
we all agree. The speakers currently, up to this point, as far as I understand, all have come to the same conclusion that the description that might makes right, not prescription, description that might makes right, is true.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, are we all in
At the end of
agreement?
the day,
Like,
it's all power.
just okay. So sweet, really. Okay, so like some really real like geopolitics happening here. Yeah. Okay, we all agree on that. But like you said earlier, like prescriptively, like I think we obviously agree that that's morally icky. Like that's morally wrong, right?
I don't believe that.
So now we have disagreement. All right, that's so sweet. Okay, so here's
Well,
the
if you want to talk about the
disagreement.
prescriptions, that's a different
Disagreement.
thing.
I think it's morally well, not. I don't think it's quote unquote good or bad that like this thing is. It's like kind of complaining about gravity, don't you think?
I think yeah, actually, I agree with Savitar. I think when we look at violence, like nowadays, we would say that like avoid it at all costs because we see it as like a morally bad thing. But I think let's say go back to the American Revolution, right? If we were like being oppressed by the British or whatever, like since we all keep like this fundamental moral axioms that we did, we would say that hey, best we can, let's avoid violence under no circumstance. Let's just try and ask the king to like give us our rights or whatever the fuck. And we would generally, and by our moral axioms, we would try to avoid violence. But like looking back at it now, we would say that okay, getting it back to that level was probably a net positive. I'd say
I don't think
that
everyone here shares that moral axiom. I just want to make that clear.
sure, I guess sure, but on a more how do I explain this? I think acts of violence are something to look back to in the sense that like we often accept acts of violence as just what it is, even if we even if our morals like tend to say that violence is like the last measure. We could often look at history to where acts of violence seemingly produced better outcomes. Sorry if I kind of jumped around there.
Hiroshima, Nagasaki.
We've had this debate.
Yeah.
We can rehash that one if you want.
Yeah,
But
sorry if I jumped
I
around.
gotta give my
Hopefully,
kids an hour, and that'll take several.
I probably gotta go soon, fair enough. But yeah, me and Space Beard have had this conversation about whether or
We
not
spent about 4 hours on that one.
Oh, it's a good conversation though. I liked it.
Dude,
I thoroughly
is that
enjoyed
sunlight
myself.
coming in your window?
Yeah, dog. I'm in a Crystal Palace, 0.5 AUs from the sun.
Wow.
It's always sunny.
Right on. Okay. Right on.
Yeah, so does
I'm in
anybody like,
Japan.
do we all agree that complaining about like the might makes right description is the equivalent of complaining about gravity?
Well,
No,
yeah,
I don't like. I don't like. So I don't like the words "might makes right" only because like that implies there's some moral good in there, isn't?
Well, I mean, I actually, I for one, you can find this cringy, but I totally disregard the is-ought distinction, and I think
very
that
cringy,
it's all just a mix of power, and I think that humans are willing to be violent based upon their aesthetic, and I think that somewhere in that balance of power, my aesthetic lies, and that's exactly what it ought to be, and that I don't think that prescriptions are relevant.
do you think that going forward with like
Other than being able
hierarchies,
to influence others?
do you think that going forward with like hierarchies and like I guess creating different or sustaining hierarchies that there are ways to make it to where it doesn't fall back to the threat of violence, or do you think that's just innate within hierarchies, human hierarchies?
I think it's implied in existence. The capacity to the capacity for violence is the implication of violence.
So, Savitar, your friend Want, your best buddy, says,
I love it.
I won't.
Can someone on there, meaning the panel, please ask Savitar what Savitar means by makes right in the statement might makes right.
God damn it, Won't.
Yeah, so like we already went over that already.
Description.
You kind of missed it, the conversation. But you know what? As Prime says multiple times, he has a great YouTube channel that you can go to. He will definitely put the link there.
I can
And
answer
you can
this one,
watch
actually.
The entire VOD, which is
God.
why you should all sub to Prime immediately and go to his YouTube channel as well and sub to that as well.
Well, here I can
have a
actually,
response,
if I may, I would say that right in the context of reality is indistinguishable from power, and I think that might ultimately the implication of violence, the implication of might actually is exactly what power is. So it's not that might makes right. It's that might is right. There is nothing but might. There is nothing that exists other than power in relationships between anything.
Or I wanted to
Everything
mention,
emerges from that
a Viking talking?
section of
Rage.
That's a
in
valid
conversation,
point.
in conversations with some of my friends, with the phrase "might makes right," I tend to use the phrase "might makes real," because you can have like things that are imaginary; they don't take place in reality. But
And what's
might
right is
is
what's
how you
real.
bring
The entire
the
perception is
unreal
reality
to
point.
reality.
Sorry, say it again,
What's
Rage.
real?
I didn't catch
I'm
that
sorry,
last
that was my
part.
fault.
No problem. Rage, can you repeat it again?
Instead of might makes right, because right and wrong is about like moral, like truth values and whatnot, you would say might makes real, because it's the things that are like tangible in real life. It's not like abstract things. It's like the physical interactions between people and matter and whatever. Might is what allows you to interact with things.
But what about like psychological might, right? If you have like a psychological advantage over someone else and they're simply doing things for whatever reason, right? They think you
Right, but
have
that takes place in reality. Like it's not your imagination. Like you don't, if you like,
Your
it's not
imagination is
taking
real.
place. Not
Your
everything in your
actions based on
imagination
your
is
imagination.
real.
No, I mean I don't mean that like everything in your mind exists outside of your mind. I mean your imagination.
Well, yes,
is real.
your imagination is real, but like the
It has
concepts that
real
you use
power.
in your imagination aren't necessarily things that
Those are
have
you.
impact in the physical world.
Right? Like morals are real. That doesn't mean that they're objective and can affect the world. Like the morals inside your head are real. Right? Like your thoughts are there. They're not just
I
like
don't know if like
supernatural non-existent thing.
objective isn't the right word here, but like categorical is probably the one you're looking for, right? Because there isn't one that's like overall encompassing, true in all circumstances, right? But like objective and subjective are talking about distinctions between like the actor and overall like works on society, right? Like we would say that like there is some objective force called gravity. You know what I mean? But it's not like it's a categorical truth. Categorical just means for the people in the chat that it's true in all categories. It's true whenever you apply it, right? So yeah. Sorry, it's
no, it's fine.
It's a yeah. It's a bit of a it's like some technical Terry stuff.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
So I don't know if I like necessarily. I don't like the idea of like might makes right. I understand where Rage is coming from here, where you might say that like might gives you the ability, or power gives you the ability to like enact your will. And make the, I guess, the unreal real. Saying that makes it a little bit like weird, but I understand where you're coming from. And I pretty much agree with you, right? Like that when we say that like there's things that are like right and wrong, do we actually understand there's some actually level power there? That there's like some underliving thing that like who has power in society actually decides like what is good, what is bad. So we can understand that the major stakeholders have decided traditionally in society what is good and what is bad. So when we look at like democracy and we look at, say, again, I'm just going to rewind it back like 10 years ago, right? The evangelical Christians are the ones who were in power, and they were the ones who decided from a society standpoint, we decided was right or wrong, like at a societal level anyway, right? And we enacted like they enacted power to enforce that truth. So we can understand that's why a lot of, say, our LGBT brothers, sisters, and MBs were unfortunately oppressed in the way that they were, right? And as we understand, is that they lost power, right? And as the liberal like group gained power, that like liberal like truth, I guess, sort of became like enacted, and that now we understand that our like our LGBT brothers, sisters, and MBs, that they're right to live the lives they want. That we understand from that traditional utilitarian perspective that this is good, right? And that's how we like legislate. And that power of like legislation isn't just like at a societal level; it's everywhere. And that cultural like power that the US puts out is going to push that out, if that makes sense.
I think that might makes right is a little bit of a rhetorical device in this case, like especially when I say it, because I don't believe that there is right and wrong. So the is and the ought distinction for me doesn't exist. What is what is, and what is controlled by power, and might makes what is. Therefore, might makes everything. And if there is a right, right is what is, might made it because
Yeah, so to
nothing
be
other
clear,
than
what I
might
was
made
saying
it.
there was that might makes correct, I guess. Like we got like two different definitions of right.
Correct
That
is
right. Yeah, but correct and like morally right are like two different things. We've got like two different meanings of right in society in terms of like non-directional. So like saying might makes correct, like defines what is correct and incorrect is what I would say.
yeah, vectors of what power is willing to accept.
Yeah.
If that's what you're going to say, it's like vectors of what power is willing to accept. When power shifts, they're willing to accept something else, but ultimately that's just like power controlling what is.
Somebody mentioned that they don't believe that might makes like the might argument, the power argument should be prescriptive. And then there was disagreement on that.
That's interesting. Who said that?
I think it was I may be confusing, but I thought Sudmuffin said that the idea of might makes right, or like basing everything on like power and violence, was uncomfortable or icky or something. I don't remember the exact phraseology that was used.
Oh yeah.
Oh, he said.
Let's add Muffin. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure. Like I agree with the overall premise of might makes right. That like the Thrasymachine argument of like the reality you construct is the reality that you live in. Like that makes sense. But that doesn't mean that you're morally correct. That was the idea that I was trying to get across. And if
Well, we don't believe me and Space Spirit and Killson. Well, maybe not Killson.
I don't believe in the idea of morally correct.
Yeah, we don't believe in like morals have truth value. At least me and Space Spirit and Killson is in the same umbrella, but he doesn't hold the same.
In the same umbrella, just like in the area that's correct and not standing out in the rain acting like a dickhead because the umbrella doesn't exist.
Yep.
I'm sorry, guys. You skipped out like the first half of what you were saying.
I mean,
me and Space Spirit don't believe that there's like truth value within like morals in general.
Oh no, yeah, like more relativism to like a certain extent. Yeah, I agree with that absolutely. Yeah. Like I would agree with that. So like to the extent that like might would make something right if it's already like to a certain extent morally relative.
Well, it depends how you look at right. So if you look at right, how they get into right, what's the difference between right and rights? And it gets all muddled when you start talking about liberal philosophy. But ultimately, this is why I consider liberalism to be totalitarian political ideologies, because they literally define what ought be, what is, based upon the power of the state and based upon the whims of society, right? Based upon the.
Could you expound that on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, human rights as an extension
of liberalism.
Yeah. So basically, that their idea of rights, right? These definitions of what is right, ultimately stems from the power of the state, or rather, what they claim is natural rights, what was God's cultural Christianity. It's all pretty muddy. Ultimately, it's not something I really agree with. But basically, is that you have this idea of rights being what is right and rights
from a source, right?
Oh, I do. No, that's what liberalism is. Liberalism is
by definition like liberalism in order to be a liberal or
to be given liberty
ideology.
To be given liberty, to be given liberty is to be given liberty from a ultimate source of power. The state being the ultimate source of power that gives you liberties, that gives you rights. I mean, if you've ever worked on a ship, right, or in the military, you're given liberties by your commander. That commander has.
Yeah, I'm a veteran. Yeah, sure. Go on.
Right? So when you are given liberty, you are given liberties, you're given rights by the state. That state is ultimately claiming the foundations of total power over your existence, and therefore their power is defining what is and is not right in the form of rights. And so this is just another example.
Do you believe we can't have a social contract based on mutual benefit, that all social contracts are based on a power dynamic? Like intrinsically, two people couldn't agree to live for mutual benefit without one having power over the other or creating that like abuse of power?
Does there need to be abuse of power in order to have a power dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately the only thing that's real in anything that you just said is power.
Interesting. That didn't kind of answer the question. I would just even though me and Space Spirit disagree on certain things, I would just answer. I'm going to answer the question, even though it wasn't necessarily asked towards me. I would say that one, there doesn't need, like, power dynamics within himself doesn't require like an abuse of power or a threat there, but there is like
But
overall
even if it's abuse of power,
well, it's funny. That's
power is
pretty funny.
power.
I agree. Yeah, but I would just say that generally speaking, even if they're these people are working together for mutual benefit and stuff like that, and they may not be thinking of it subconsciously speaking, if we have one scrawny person that's really good at like building, making fires and stuff, and we have a really big brawny person that's good at hunting and stuff like that. Ultimately speaking, there is this implied idea that the big brawny person, if like blows come to blows, big brawny person is going to get what he wants, or he or
Little
she,
guy's
or
going to be making fire whether little guy likes it or not.
yeah.
Hmm.
Uh,
It's just better off for everybody if little guy likes to make fire.
I think that really assumes
Including
a
little
state of
guy.
nature where people are intrinsically like living for greed and self-preservation.
No,
I just don't.
I don't
see
even
that.
believe that's the case. I mean,
No,
I fundamentally believe that gift economies are the fundamental nature of humanity, right? But then again, behind the emergence of gift economy is power. Not like the thing propping it up, not that psychological sense of indebtedness doesn't exist, but behind all of that is the implication of power.
So
if I am bigger than you, the only thing keeping you from continue if I am physically greater than you, if I have more power than you, if you cannot defend yourself against me, the only thing that makes your existence right is the fact that I want you to exist.
No, because I got 3 of my friends, and we have a village separate.
You have
from
more
you.
power.
Yeah, you have more power
But
now.
I'm
And
saying
you have
we
more power.
isolated ourselves from you to separate the power dynamic. We
Okay,
don't
I have
want
10 people.
where you force your strength on us.
I have 10 people, and we don't think you should exist. You don't exist.
Yeah, so like you brought up like the separation. That's just more power. Like you can use the environment, and the environment can give you power as well. So you're just not engaging with it fully. Like obviously, if you have 3 people and he's one person, you don't even need the 3 people. If he's bigger and stronger than you, he's like a professional heavyweight MMA fighter. My best friend Remington here isn't gonna give a shit how big you are. You're gonna go down all the same.
So Sevatar, two Nuktanis. Is that how you pronounce your name? I want to be sure.
You can call me Luke. Nuke Lanny, it just flips the L and the N in my name.
I do have to go soon, Prime. So.
Oh, okay, sure. But in terms of,
is there a question or something?
Yeah. In terms of that, the mutual benefit, right? Like, are you saying that if such an agreement were to take place, that in the end, it's only because neither party perceives advent, either that they can one up the other person, or that it's advantageous to do so. That maybe they could, but it's not advantageous to do so. So instead, we'll work for mutual benefit.
It's more or less that it's just like it would be that both people in the party have come to a conclusion that it is just better off to work together. For whatever reason that may be, like scrawny little guy could find protection in big burly guy, and big burly guy says, you know what, I'm not good at making fire. This little guy seems pretty good at it. I need a fire every once in a while because I like cooked food and I like being warm. So I'll protect little guy so that we have a mutual agreement. But ultimately, if I find someone else that's really good at making fire, or find a tool that is really good at making fire, little guy has kind of outlived his usefulness, and so we can either break off, or if he still tries to manipulate me or get me to do stuff, I can just snap his arm.
Yeah, I think there's a million ways to
Anyway,
go about that.
I gotta go.
Yes, Avatar.
Yeah, Space Beard and Killson could probably deal with this better. Have a great night, everybody. Sub to Prime. Sub
Have
to
a good one,
Prime.
man.
Yeah,
You'll stop being
So-
a cringe emotivist soon.
Maybe.
Yeah. Good luck. Hey, so I think one thing that needs to be stated here is, again, he said, okay, all these hypothetical situations about whether or not the little guy's useful, but in reality, the way I see it is power is still power, whether or not you exercise that power, right? So it doesn't matter what I think about the usefulness of the little guy. It's still my power that decides whether or not the little guy exists. Even if I choose to do nothing about it, even if I let him exist, even if I allow the little guy to destroy me, I had the power in the situation if I have the power. Power is the only thing that's real. It doesn't necessarily always boil down to physical strength. Sometimes it can be intelligence. Sometimes it can be institutional power. It can be a million. Power is a very flexible thing. But at the base of it is power, whether it's exercised or not.
Power. I'm good.
Okay. Kosan? Just wondering if you want to add anything to this.
I've pretty much already said what I need to, right? About like how power works and where my position on morals is. If anyone,
question. Even though Savitar just left, his definition of power was like the ability or like the mechanism for making people do things, even if they don't want to do those things. If you're in a mutual agreement, presumably both people want to do the thing. So like it's not I guess you're not exercising that
Agreements are
definition
not
of
always
power.
consensual.
Is that mutual then, though? What is? I may be missing a definition.
I mean, agreements are not always consensual. Sometimes agreements are based upon coercion. Sometimes agreements are based upon a recognition of power dynamic, right?
Of course.
So ultimately,
But I don't know if the example given by Luke falls into that, because I think it's. Or Luke, you could rephrase your question.
Well, no, yeah, essentially I'm saying if I have a house and I pick berries and you have a house by the river and we just trade berries for fish every day and walk away from each other and we've created a mutually beneficial like contract between the two of us, where's the implied power dynamic? This is where I'm curious for you guys to expand, because I'm an applied ethicist. I think meta ethics is really unapplicable to modern society. And I think it's fun thought experiments, but when we really come down to approaching issues, we need to be looking at numbers and actual like effects in reality. So I want to know where you guys think we move that.
You're basically assuming the natural existence of private property when you say, okay, I have these berries and you have those fishes, I have my house and you have your house, but your house and your berries are only your house and your berries so long as you make them your house and your berries, so long as you maintain the power of exclusion, which is what to private is, which is what private property is. It is based upon power. In our current society, it's based upon the state. In the absence of the state, if you maintain private property, you are the state. Otherwise, you don't have private property. You're just hanging out with some berries in some house that at any given moment is subject to power.
Yeah, for private use, for like on the individual level, yeah, the fundamentals of private property is the fact that you can exert power over this, I don't know, I guess set of land, if we're gonna go back to land, that you can exert power, do what you want with that land without like foreign interference in most cases, except for like the state and shit like that.
This is my thing, right? My thing. I have this thing in my hand. I'm possessing this thing, okay? What makes it my thing is that I can grasp it. If you can take it from me, it's not my thing unless somebody with more power comes and says that's his thing, give it back. And if you say that's not his thing, it's my thing now, it's up to your power. Well, that's why we have war. That's why we have laws. That's why we have weapons. That's why we have all of this, because ultimately it all boils down to power.
Do you guys believe that private property can exist without the state, or do you think private property is automatically connected to like some type of monopoly of force, like the state?
I think private property is an expression of state power. In the absence of a greater state, private property is state. So if I say this is my plot of land and I'm maintaining my monopoly on violence here, if that goes unchallenged, I am the state. If I am defeated, I'm no longer the state and they're the state. If neither of us are the state, it's not private property because it has to be maintained by violence, because private property is literally the right of exclusion. The right is defined by power.
So one, that sounded like you're explaining the rules to a board game.
What it is, it's a legal system. Private property is a legal system, not some fucking magical power of God.
Yeah. But I generally like reject like Nuke's position at the start. You're like starting at like premise 5 and like have like invisible premise 1, 2, 3, 4. This is why we talk about meta ethics, is to get to normative ethics, to get to applied ethics.
It's capitalist realism is what it is. It's actually a real
Sorry.
thing.
Hey.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say because like you can't have like these discussions about like, well, is the state bad, is power bad, right? Because we understand like if we want to talk in like big Marxist terms, right? We understand that like Marx is a moral realist. He had very moral weight to the things that he said in like Capital. If you're any kind of like communist or capitalist or like whatever, right? If you want to look at like applied positions that are interesting, sure, right? But like how you even discuss like whether like when we look at applied ethics, right? We look at like the most famous applied ethics position, veganism, right? How do you get there without having an understanding of meta ethics in the first place?
Who's that to?
Mr. Nuke.
It would be over to me. I think you can work backwards from an applied ethical issue to form a meta ethics if you want to create a cohesive meta ethics. I look at veganism and I look at utility and I look at care ethics and human issues, and I've derived a meta ethics based on harm reduction, and I think it's a broadly applicable meta ethics.
Yeah, so you've got a meta ethic. You're just like not saying it.
Well, that's because I'm saying that we can discuss meta ethics all day, but applying the ethics is really what we need to get to the crux of and how we choose to apply it. And I think
how are you gonna talk about like premise 4 without discussing like premise 1?
I think most people don't care about premise 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think when we get out of leftist space and we get into the real world, most people aren't listening to premise 1, 2, 3, and 4. They want to know about the application.
I agree, but we understand
He
like,
has the
most
luxury
people have
of
like
power.
an oppression, right? Yeah,
He has
so
the
we understand that
luxury of
most
power.
so most people have most people have. We already understand like when we talk to like when you or I like we're talking in like a pretty like academic sense right now, and we're talking to an audience of people who are interested in philosophy and politics, right? Particularly, right? So these are the kind of spaces where we discuss it, and we're talking to normal people, right? We understand that the most normal people have like some like blend of virtue ethics and utilitarianism. There is like a stock standard default position that people have. They don't because they don't think about ethics or anything like this, right? But those of us that discuss it, right, do, and we have an underlying thing that we like create a cohesive position out of, that we come to a conclusion about, and then from there, when we go to explain it to other people, we like appeal to their position, right? Because when you're trying to convince someone to agree with like an applied ethic or a normative ethic or whatever, right, or how to put a policy into place, what you're looking at is actually looking to convince them, and when you're convincing someone else, you take their assumptions and you talk to them, right? Like I wouldn't go to someone and go, well, if you understand there isn't any good and any bad, and you understand that from there you only have preferences, and then from preferences we can get to right? Then from preferences we get to socialism, and this is why you see we need to abolish the private property, right? No, I'm going to go to the average person. I'm going to go, your boss is fucking you, dude, right? Wouldn't it be way better if you could pick your boss? Like,
Yeah, nobody talks like this in real life. So I don't. You're never gonna pass any policy by talking to them like this.
yeah, that's why you talk to people to convince them on their ground. You never talk to someone from your position. If you do so, you're a moron. You should be engaging in politics. You're always going to be meeting people where they're at.
Right. So I think one thing that needs to be addressed here is Luke, you said that like I don't need to address these things, right? Because it's just assumed that private property exists, right? But that's because you're coming to an ethical position from what is the prevalent, like the assumptions of the prevalent power structure. The original argument rested on the assumption of the existence of their basic assumptions that are based upon their systems of power. And there's actually, and I haven't read it, so I can't say it's good. I'm dyslexic. I don't really read long form books, and there's no audiobook yet, but I've listened to discussions about it. I'm familiar with the idea. There's this idea called capitalist realism, and there's a book called Capitalist Realism that deals with the philosophical undercurrent that just assumes as natural law or natural order the basic fundamental legal systems of capitalism when they're not natural law. They're legal systems that are enacted and enforced by power.
Capitalist realism is like, for people who don't know in the chat, it basically comes down to the end statement of the book, which is something like people can envision the end of the world before they can envision the end of capitalism. That's basically like explaining like how it's ingrained and stuff for people who might be interested in it. Sorry, go on. I just wanted to explain like for people who don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I mean, I'm curious what the meta ethical position you're coming from when you're saying, okay, I can have this mutually beneficial agreement based upon my stuff and his stuff. Like, what's the meta ethical position that underpins your concept of what makes it his stuff and what makes it their stuff? Because I mean, there's various meta ethical positions that.
I don't believe in private property in that sense. My statement of having berries and having fish was simply to say that they're things you're providing to the exchange in the sense of the social contract. I come from harm reductionism. That's where I'm deriving a lot of my theories and the way I view social interactions. Oh goodness, I don't know everyone here, so guy on the top, the philosopher with the beard. Thank you for your perspective on discussing that stuff. I am new to this sort of discussion space. I am trying to learn how to best communicate ideas, so that was good for me to hear.
Which we both have beards, and we both.
Well,
discussed
you in particular with the red lighting. Yes.
I wanted to say, Kyo-san, that like watching you, like do like beard care was like zen. Like watching you, I'm like, oh wow, I could just watch that all day. It's really calming. Okay. Did you have any more questions? Did any of you have any more questions on this or points when to get out? Anything? Okay. Nope. All right. Fair enough. All right. So then, in that case, I'm going to fucking sleep. So I'm going to send you off.
Not that time.
Tomorrow, we're going to do the thing with our friend Joe, the Silly Serious, who was here previously, and Alice, after all, who was also here previously. They're going to have a gender abolition type discussion, not debate, even though I want them to rip each other's heads off. They're going to just have the talk. Oh, well, I guess, all right. But it'll be great. It'll be at like I'm guessing 9 p.m. Eastern. So come back for that, and we'll have open walk-on panel afterwards, of course, and maybe more philosophy. Who knows? I don't know. I literally never have any idea where we take these things. But come back for that. If you haven't followed the channel yet, please do. We do this 6 days a week. 6 days a week, we give you this content. So if you've been enjoying it, at the very least, do yourself a favor and follow it. I am assuming they didn't go offline, because people always go offline the moment I fucking rate them. I am going to send you off to a friend who was also took part with the Lily, the Amazon Lily earlier today. Lyra. God damn it, Lyra. I will send you off to Lyra. Everyone be kind to her. She's a nice one. Everyone's been really welcoming to her. So give her a follow. And then, yeah, be back tomorrow.